For centuries, history has been a collection of puzzles with missing pieces, stories half told, secrets buried deep, and mysteries that seemed forever lost to time. But something extraordinary is happening right now. We are living through a revolution in how we understand our past, not because we've found new scrolls or dug up fresh ruins, but because modern technology is handing us the keys to locked doors we never thought we could open. Think about it. Mysteries that have baffled scholars for hundreds, even thousands of years, are suddenly within our grasp, simply because the tools we use to investigate them have evolved in ways that feel almost like science fiction. It's not just about bigger shovels or sharper telescopes. We're talking about breakthroughs like DNA analysis that can trace ancestry and identity from a single strand of hair, LiDAR scanning that can map entire lost cities hidden beneath jungle canopies, and artificial intelligence that sifts through mountains of data to find patterns no human eye could ever detect. These aren't mere upgrades, they're game changers, transforming dusty artifacts and faded inscriptions into living, breathing stories waiting to be retold. This is about rewriting history, not with guesses but with evidence, not with legend but with proof. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. 30 historical mysteries that modern science is closer than ever to solving. From the fate of lost civilizations and the identities of ancient royalty to the truth behind legendary disappearances and unexplained monuments, we're going to explore how today's innovations are shedding light on yesterday's enigmas. So whether you're a history buff, a tech enthusiast, or just someone who loves a good mystery, you're in the right place. Get ready for a journey into the past powered by the future. Our journey begins with one of America's oldest and most enduring mysteries, the lost colony of Roanoke. In 1587, a group of approximately 115 English settlers, including women and children, established a foothold on the coast of what is now North Carolina. Their governor, John White, sailed back to England for urgent supplies, but his return was delayed for 3 long years by war and a naval conflict with Spain. When he finally made it back to Roanoke in 1590, the entire settlement was deserted. There was no sign of a struggle, no mass grave, just a single cryptic clue carved into a wooden post, the word Croatoan. This single word has fueled speculation and debate for over 4 centuries. Did the colonists simply move to a nearby island? Were they wiped out by disease or conflict? Or did they do something far more remarkable? For generations, historians were limited to the same dusty documents and maps. But now, technology is providing entirely new ways to investigate. One of the most promising tools is ground-penetrating radar, or GPR. This non-invasive technology allows archaeologists to see beneath the soil without ever lifting a shovel. It sends radar pulses into the ground and builds a picture of subsurface anomalies. Think of it as a sonogram for the Earth. Teams have been systematically scanning the area around the fort site and beyond, looking for evidence of smaller, secondary settlements that might have been established by the colonists after White left. Finding evidence of Elizabethan-era activity away from the main site would strongly support the theory that the group dispersed and tried to survive independently. Perhaps the most powerful tool in this modern investigation is DNA analysis. The historical record indicates the colonists had relatively peaceful interactions with the local Croatoan people, making the integration theory highly plausible. Researchers are now collaborating with modern-day descendants of the Native American tribes from that region, collecting saliva samples to build extensive genetic databases. The goal is to find genetic markers with European ancestry that date back to the 16th century, a silent echo of the lost settlers living on in their descendants. This isn't a quick process. It requires comparing thousands of genetic sequences, but it offers the most direct possible evidence of the colonists' fate. A single, verifiable genetic link could rewrite the history books and finally answer a question that has persisted since the age of Queen Elizabeth I. From the silent disappearance of an entire colony, we move to the shadows of Victorian London and a name that still chills the blood: Jack the Ripper. In the autumn of 1888, the Whitacapel district was gripped by a terror unlike any it had known. Over a few brutal months, at least 5 women were murdered with a horrifying ferocity that suggested a killer with surgical knowledge. The press sensationalized the crimes, the public demanded answers, but the Metropolitan Police were always one step behind. The killer, who taunted authorities with letters signed with that infamous name, vanished into the fog, leaving behind a mystery that has spawned countless books, films, and theories, but no definitive answer. For over a century, the question has remained: who was Jack the Ripper? The list of suspects is long and varied, reading like a who's who of Victorian London. There was Montague John Drute, a barrister and teacher who died by suicide shortly after the last murder. There was Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant and barber who was committed to an asylum and was reportedly identified by a witness, though the evidence was never concrete. Some even pointed a finger at someone in the royal family, suggesting a cover-up to protect the monarchy from scandal. Each theory has its fervent believers and its critical flaws, largely because the police work of the era, while earnest, was hopelessly unequipped for such a calculated predator. They lacked fingerprinting, they had no understanding of psychological profiling, and the crime scenes were contaminated by onlookers and rudimentary evidence collection. This is precisely where modern science is stepping in to rewrite the final chapter of this grim story. The most promising avenue involves genetic genealogy, the same technique used to catch the Golden State Killer decades after his crimes. The key evidence, not a weapon or a body, but the letters. Several of the letters sent to the police claiming to be from the killer have been preserved, and on some of these envelopes and documents, there are potential saliva seals and stamps that could hold trace amounts of DNA. The challenge is immense. The documents are over 130 years old, handled by countless people, and the organic material is exceedingly degraded. But recent advances in DNA extraction can work with fragments so small they were once considered useless. The process would involve carefully lifting a sample from a letter or, perhaps more promisingly, from articles of clothing belonging to the victims that have been kept in storage. If a viable genetic profile can be extracted from a bloodstain or other biological material that can be incontrovertibly linked to the killer, that profile could then be uploaded to public genealogical databases. Investigators wouldn't be looking for a direct match, but for distant relatives, building out a vast family tree that could eventually lead them back to a single individual living in London in 1888. This technique doesn't just point to a suspect, it can effectively prove lineage, potentially ruling out long-standing candidates like Drute or confirming others like Kosminski with a level of certainty that Victorian detectives could only dream of. It's a long shot, but it represents the best chance we have ever had to finally put a real name to the most infamous pseudonym in criminal history. Leaving the foggy streets of Whitacapel behind, we travel thousands of years back in time and thousands of miles to the sun-baked sands of Giza to confront perhaps the most iconic and debated mystery of all. How did the ancient Egyptians build the Great Pyramid? For its time, the scale of this project was simply staggering. Constructed around 2500 BC for the pharaoh Khufu, it stood as the tallest man-made structure in the world for nearly 4,000 years. We're talking about moving an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing more than 2 average cars, and positioning them with a precision that rivals modern engineering. For centuries, the prevailing image has been one of countless laborers toiling under the lash, dragging these monstrous stones up massive ramps of earth and brick. But this simple explanation has never quite satisfied everyone, leaving a vacuum filled with increasingly elaborate theories, from lost ancient technologies to, yes, the help of extraterrestrial visitors. The ramp theory itself has several variations. The straight ramp, a single massive incline built directly against one side of the pyramid, would have to be incredibly long and wide to be usable, requiring more construction material than the pyramid itself. The zigzagging ramp winding its way up the structure's faces seems more plausible but raises tricky questions about stability and how workers navigated the tight corners with huge blocks. Then there's the internal spiral ramp theory, which suggests the builders constructed a corkscrew ramp within the pyramid's outer shell, dismantling it as they worked downward. Each of these ideas has merit, but each also has significant logistical flaws that have kept the debate alive and fervent. This is where modern technology is moving us beyond speculation and into the realm of hard data. One of the most exciting tools is muon tomography. Muons are subatomic particles that constantly rain down from the atmosphere, passing through solid objects. By placing sensitive muon detectors in known chambers and passages within the pyramid, scientists can map the density of the structure around them. It's essentially a giant cosmic X-ray machine. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids project used this technology to announce the discovery of a significant void, dubbed the Big Void, located above the Grand Gallery. Is this a long sealed construction chamber, a hidden relieving structure, or something else entirely? Confirming its purpose and mapping its exact dimensions could provide the first real blueprint of a construction technique hidden for millennia. Beyond seeing through stone, we're also learning to read it. Sophisticated material analysis is another key to unlocking this puzzle. Researchers are using techniques like petrography and X-ray diffraction to study the microscopic composition of the pyramid's limestone and granite blocks. This isn't just about identifying the quarry they came from. It's about understanding the ancient recipe for the mortar used to set them. By analyzing its chemical signature, scientists can reverse engineer the binding material, which might have had properties that made sliding massive blocks significantly easier than we previously imagined. Perhaps the ancient Egyptians developed a type of slick slurry or lubricant that reduced friction dramatically, turning an impossible dragging job into a manageable one. Finally, robotics are granting us access to the pyramid's most tightly guarded secrets. For decades, small, narrow shafts leading from the Queen's chamber have puzzled Egyptologists. In 2002, a team sent a compact robot named Pyramid Rover up one of these shafts, only to find it blocked by a limestone door with 2 copper handles. A later expedition drilled a tiny hole through this door, revealing a small chamber with another sealed door beyond. What lies behind it? Future robotic missions, equipped with even more advanced fiber optic cameras and delicate tools, could one day navigate these passages without causing damage, potentially uncovering the ancient worker logs or architectural plans that pharaonic engineers might have sealed away for eternity, finally giving the builders themselves a voice. Shifting from the monumental stone of the pyramids, we now journey to the vast, windswept steppes of Mongolia for a mystery defined not by what was built, but by what was deliberately hidden, the final resting place of Genghis Khan. The man who forged the largest contiguous empire in history died in 1227, and according to legend, his funeral procession carried out a mission of absolute secrecy. Anyone who witnessed the convoy was killed on the spot, and after the great Khan was interred, 1,000 horses were allegedly ridden back and forth over the grave to trample the earth flat, obliterating any trace of its location. The slaves who built the tomb were then executed by the soldiers, and finally, those soldiers themselves were killed to protect the secret. This ruthless efficiency has kept the tomb lost for nearly 800 years, making it one of history's most coveted archaeological prizes, protected not by stone but by silence and terror. The search is fraught with more than just logistical challenges. It is deeply entwined with cultural and spiritual beliefs. For many Mongolians, Genghis Khan is a near-sacred figure, and the idea of excavating his tomb is viewed as a profound desecration, a disturbance of a site meant to remain eternally peaceful. The area long suspected to hold the tomb, near the sacred mountain of Berkhan Koldun in the Kentai province, is often referred to as the Ik Korig, or the Great Taboo, a place historically off-limits to outsiders. This immense respect means that any modern search cannot involve shovels or trenches. The solution must be found through technology that listens to the earth without ever touching it, that sees without ever looking. This is where satellite imagery and aerial photography are completely transforming the hunt. By analyzing high-resolution images of the Mongolian landscape, archaeologists can now identify subtle anthropogenic features, unnatural patterns invisible from the ground. They might spot faint discolorations in the vegetation that suggest buried stonework, or slight alterations in the microtopography that hint at filled-in pits or the foundations of long-abandoned structures that served as guard posts or ceremonial sites. This wide-area analysis allows researchers to narrow a search area of thousands of square miles down to a few dozen promising hectares, saving immense time and resources while showing the utmost respect for the local customs. On a more focused scale, drones have become the workhorses of this non-invasive investigation. Equipped with multi-spectral and LiDAR sensors, these unmanned aerial vehicles can fly precise grids over these targeted zones. LiDAR is particularly powerful in this environment. It can see through the forest canopy covering Berkhan Koldun, digitally stripping away the trees to create a detailed, three-dimensional map of the ground surface below. This could reveal perfectly aligned stone walls, the geometric shapes of plazas or tombs, or even the remnants of the very road used by the funeral procession 8 centuries ago, all hidden for generations beneath the vegetation. Once a potential site is identified from the air, the next step involves sensing what lies beneath the surface, again without a single shovel breaking the soil. This is the domain of geophysical survey techniques like ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry. GPR would be towed by a vehicle or an operator walking a grid, sending radar waves into the ground to build a picture of subsurface anomalies, voids, chambers, or concentrations of worked stone that stand out from the natural geology. Magnetometry, meanwhile, measures tiny variations in the Earth's magnetic field caused by fired materials like kiln-baked bricks or by disturbed soil, which retains a different magnetic signature than the undisturbed Earth around it. A coordinated effort using these tools could one day paint a clear, underground picture of a grand, hidden mausoleum, finally solving a mystery that has endured since the days of the Mongol Empire, all while leaving the sacred ground completely untouched. Moving from the secretive burial plains of Mongolia, we arrive at a monument that hides its secrets in plain sight, standing defiantly against the English sky for thousands of years, Stonehenge. This ring of towering sarsen stones and smaller bluestones is instantly recognizable, yet its true purpose remains one of prehistory's most compelling puzzles. Was it a celestial calendar, a temple for sun worship, a sacred healing site, or a grand cemetery for the Neolithic elite? For centuries, the lack of written records left us with little more than speculation and folklore, forcing us to interpret the intentions of its builders through the silent language of archaeology. But today, that language is becoming far more eloquent thanks to a suite of technologies that allow us to see the landscape not as it is, but as it was 4,500 years ago. The traditional theories are well known. The most famous is its alignment with the solstices. The heel stone frames the rising sun on the summer solstice, an event that draws thousands of modern pilgrims, suggesting its builders held a deep reverence for the solar cycle. This has led many to view it as a sophisticated astronomical observatory, a Stone Age computer for predicting eclipses and marking the seasons. Other theories point to the discovery of human remains, many showing signs of severe injury or illness, proposing it was a destination for healing. A prehistoric Lourdes where the power of the bluestones, hauled from mountains over 150 miles away, was believed to have curative properties. Yet another school of thought sees it as a unified political symbol, a project so vast it required the cooperation of disparate tribes across Britain, serving as a powerful statement of shared identity and power. Each theory has merit, but each also feels incomplete, like trying to understand a cathedral by only studying its foundation. This is where modern science begins to connect the dots, and it starts by understanding that Stonehenge was never an isolated monument. It was the dazzling centerpiece of an entire ritual landscape, a complex network of processional avenues, burial mounds, timber structures, and other henge monuments like Durrington Walls and Woodhenge. For a long time, piecing this landscape together was painstakingly slow work, limited by what could be seen on the ground or through aerial photography. That changed radically with the application of LiDAR, by using laser pulses to digitally strip away the vegetation and even the topsoil. Archaeologists have created stunningly detailed 3D maps of the entire Salisbury Plain. This technology has revealed a hidden world, a sprawling web of previously unknown pits, burial barrows, and pathways, showing that the area was teeming with activity and ritual for centuries. This wider context is crucial. We cannot hope to understand the purpose of the stage without knowing about the actors and the audience that moved around it. Beyond mapping what's on the surface, we're now using technology to analyze what's in the ground itself. Soil chemistry analysis is providing a revolutionary new form of evidence. When large groups of people or animals gather in one place, they leave behind a chemical signature. By taking core samples from the earth within the stone circle and along the processional avenues, scientists can measure the levels of phosphate and other organic compounds. Astonishingly high levels of phosphate at Durrington Walls, for example, indicate it was a site of massive feasting, likely connected to solstice celebrations. This tells us not just that people were there, but what they were doing. They were eating vast quantities of meat, likely as part of a great communal gathering. This kind of data transforms a theoretical, ceremonial site into a vivid picture of loud, smoky, bustling Neolithic festivals. Perhaps the most powerful tool for solving this mystery is one that allows us to step through time itself, virtual reality and 3D modeling. Archaeologists are using precise laser scans of every stone to create perfect digital replicas of Stonehenge. But they're going much further, building entire virtual environments that reconstruct the monument and its surrounding landscape at various points in its 1,500-year history. Using a VR headset, a researcher can literally stand within a complete, sound-rich simulation of Stonehenge during the winter solstice at dawn 4,000 years ago. They can observe how the shadows fall, how sound echoes off the stones, and how the entire complex interacts with the sun, moon, and stars throughout the year. This experiential research can test astronomical theories with unparalleled accuracy, ruling out some alignments and confirming others. It allows us to move beyond dry data and finally experience the space as its builders intended, feeling its power and perhaps finally understanding the profound spiritual impulse that drove a Stone Age society to achieve such a breathtaking feat of engineering and imagination. From the silent, wind-swept plains of Stonehenge, we now turn to a mystery that is the very opposite of ancient and stone. It is a story from the living memory of the last century, a tale of war, greed, and a treasure so dazzling it was called the eighth wonder of the world. This is the baffling disappearance of the Amber Room, a gift from the King of Prussia to Peter the Great in 1716. This extraordinary chamber was a masterpiece of Baroque art. Its walls were not paneled with wood or hung with tapestry, but were instead covered entirely in meticulously carved amber panels, backed with gold leaf and inlaid with precious jewels. It was a symphony in gold, a room literally wallpapered in solidified sunlight. It glowed with an almost magical, warm light when its 6 tons of amber were illuminated by hundreds of candles. Housed in the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg, it was a treasure beyond price, a proud symbol of Russian culture. That is, until 1941, when the tide of World War II swept into Russia. As Nazi forces advanced on Leningrad, curators at the Catherine Palace made a desperate attempt to save the amber room. They tried to dismantle it, but the fragile, centuries-old amber began to crumble in their hands. In a fateful decision, they chose to hide it in place, covering the priceless panels with mundane wallpaper. The ruse was woefully inadequate. The German Army's Special Kunstschutz unit, dedicated to plundering cultural treasures, found it almost immediately. They carefully dismantled the entire room, packed the panels into 27 crates, and shipped them to Königsberg Castle in East Prussia, where it was reassembled and put on display. For a few years it remained there, a trophy of conquest, but in 1944, as Allied bombs began to rain down on the city and the Soviet Red Army advanced from the east, the room was ordered to be dismantled once more, packed up and moved to safety. The crates were loaded onto a transport, and that was the last time the amber room was ever seen. Königsberg was reduced to smoldering ruins, and the world's most valuable missing treasure vanished into the fog of war. The theories about its fate are as numerous as they are compelling. The most persistent theory is that it was destroyed in the Allied bombardment of Königsberg, its precious amber panels burning like incense in a colossal, tragic fire. Others believe it was successfully evacuated and hidden in a secret network of Nazi bunkers, mines, or tunnels across what is now Poland and Germany. The most romantic theory suggests it was loaded onto a ship, the Wilhelm Gustloff, which was torpedoed and sunk by a Soviet submarine in the Baltic Sea in 1945, sending the treasure to a watery grave alongside thousands of refugees. For decades, treasure hunters have chased these leads, digging in salt mines, exploring crumbling bunkers, and diving on shipwrecks, all to no avail. The sheer scale of possible hiding places across a war-ravaged continent has made the search seem hopeless. This is where modern technology is turning a needle in a haystack search into a targeted investigation. The first crucial tool is the digitization of millions of pages of wartime archives. Institutions across Germany, Russia, and Poland are using high-resolution scanners and optical character recognition software to convert fragile, handwritten ledgers, manifests, and military orders into searchable digital databases. An AI algorithm can now cross-reference a shipping manifest from Gdansk with a troop movement report from Berlin and an eyewitness account from a former soldier, finding connections that a human researcher might spend a lifetime missing. A single, previously overlooked document, a railway bill of lading, a warehouse inventory list, or a soldier's letter home, could contain the crucial clue that narrows the search from an entire country to a single, forgotten bunker. If archival research points to a specific location on land, the next step would likely involve ground-penetrating radar. GPR units could be deployed over the grounds of Königsberg Castle, now the Russian city of Kaliningrad, or around suspected bunker complexes in the Owl Mountains of Poland. This technology would be looking for the telltale signature of man-made voids or buried crates that don't match the natural geology. Finding such an anomaly could indicate a sealed cellar or a forgotten stash room that has escaped decades of casual searching. If the evidence instead points to a maritime grave, the search moves to advanced sonar technology. Modern side-scan and multi-beam sonar systems can create photorealistic, three-dimensional maps of the seafloor, revealing the smallest details of a wreck with stunning clarity. A survey of the Wilhelm Gustloff wreck, which lies in deep, cold, and dark waters, could potentially identify cargo holds that appear undisturbed, or even the outlines of crates on the seabed nearby if they were washed out during the sinking. The cold, low-oxygen environment of the Baltic Sea is exceptional at preservation. meaning that if the amber room is down there, it might not be the pile of rubble we imagine, but a collection of intact, recognizable crates, waiting for a robotic submersible to finally shine a light on them and solve a mystery that began in the fires of the greatest war the world has ever known. Our next mystery takes us from grand chambers of amber to the pages of a book so cryptic that it has defied every attempt to understand it for over 600 years. Meet the Voynich manuscript, a bizarre medieval codex that looks like it was dropped from another dimension. It's written in an unknown script, an alphabet of curling, plant-like characters that flow from right to left in a hand that suggests a confident, practiced scribe. But the text is only half the puzzle. The pages are filled with stunning, yet utterly bewildering illustrations. Naked women bathing in interconnected green tubes, unidentifiable botanical specimens that resemble no plants on Earth, astrological charts featuring unknown constellations, and complex cosmological diagrams that seem to map a universe of pure imagination. Since its discovery by book dealer Wilfred Voynich in 1912, the manuscript has been a siren's call to the world's top cryptographers, from World War II codebreakers to modern intelligence agencies, and all of them have failed. Is it an elaborate hoax, a secret code, a lost language, or the ramblings of a medieval mind experimenting with proto-scientific concepts? The answer has remained locked away until now. The core of the mystery lies in the text itself, which exhibits fascinating linguistic properties that both encourage and frustrate decipherers. Statistical analysis shows it isn't random gibberish. It follows Zipf's law, a principle in linguistics that states in any natural language, the most frequent word will appear approximately twice as often as the second most frequent word, and so on. The Voynich text obeys this rule, suggesting an underlying structure consistent with a real language. Furthermore, the script has patterns. Certain characters only appear at the beginnings of words, others only at the ends, much like the vowels and consonants of real alphabets. Yet, for all its internal logic, it doesn't convincingly match the structure of any known language, living or dead. This has led to a deep schism in the research community. One camp believes it is a sophisticated cipher, a known language like Latin or Hebrew that has been encrypted with a complex algorithm that medieval scholars couldn't possibly have invented. The other camp argues it is a constructed language, perhaps a philosophical language or even a glossolalia, a stream of unconscious writing. And of course, there are those who maintain it is an incredibly detailed and persistent fraud designed to deceive a wealthy patron. This is where modern artificial intelligence is entering the fray, not as just another code breaker, but as the ultimate pattern recognition engine. Researchers are feeding high-resolution scans of every page into machine learning algorithms trained on hundreds of the world's languages. These AI systems don't get tired or frustrated. They can analyze the entire manuscript in minutes, looking for statistical patterns and syntactic structures that are too subtle for the human brain to detect. In 2018, a team of Canadian researchers used AI to analyze the text's linguistic DNA, and their algorithms suggested the script might be encoded Hebrew. Their proposed decryption key translated a handful of sentences into coherent phrases like, "She made recommendations to the priest, man of the house, and me and people," which, while grammatically clunky, is a far cry from nonsense. However, this finding remains highly controversial and hasn't yet yielded a full translation, highlighting a key challenge. An AI can find patterns, but it takes human linguists to interpret their meaning and validate the results. Beyond the text, the very parchment and ink hold clues that technology can now extract. Multispectral imaging is a game-changing technique for documents like this. By photographing the pages under different wavelengths of light, from ultraviolet to infrared, researchers can see beneath the surface. They can potentially detect erased text, annotations in the margins that have faded to invisibility, or even the carbon trace of preliminary sketches made by the author before the ink was applied. This could reveal the creative process. Were the illustrations drawn first with the text added as a label, or was the text written first with the images serving as a diagram? This seemingly simple piece of information could be the key to understanding the manuscript's fundamental purpose. Furthermore, advanced spectroscopy can analyze the chemical composition of the ink and pigments. If the ink is found to be a formulation common in 15th century Europe, it strengthens the case for a genuine period document. If it contains anachronistic elements, it could point toward a later forgery. The ultimate goal isn't just to translate a few words, but to understand the author's intent. Was this a manual for herbal medicine based on plants that are now extinct or fantastically misrepresented? Was it a treatise on astrology and astronomy that recorded a unique cosmological worldview? Or was it something more personal, a book of secrets, a work of art, or the private notebook of an alchemist? Breaking the Voynich code would be more than an academic triumph. It would be like opening a window into a completely unknown corner of the medieval mind, revealing either a genius so ahead of his time that his language was lost, or a hoaxer so clever he has fooled us for centuries. Modern technology, by combining the brute force pattern analysis of AI with the delicate forensic touch of imaging science, is finally providing the tools to force this most secretive of books to give up its truth. The Atlantic Ocean has offered up many strange tales, but few have captured the public imagination quite like the chilling mystery of the Mary Celeste. In December 1872, the British ship Dei Gratia spotted another vessel, the Mary Celeste, adrift off the coast of the Azores. She was under partial sail, seemingly seaworthy, but upon boarding her, the crew of the Dei Gratia found a scene of profound and baffling emptiness. The ship was completely abandoned. There was no sign of the 10 people who had been on board, including Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and a crew of 7 experienced sailors. The lifeboat was missing, but nearly everything else was left perfectly intact. A year's supply of food and water was in the hold, the crew's personal belongings were still in their quarters, and even the captain's navigational instruments and logbook remained. The only things missing were the people and the ship's chronometer. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind a perfectly good ship to drift alone across the vast ocean. For over a century, the theories have been as wild as the sea itself. The most sensational suggested piracy or mutiny, but there was no evidence of a struggle, no bloodstains, and the valuable cargo of industrial alcohol was largely untouched. Another popular theory involved a giant squid or other sea monster attack, but such a creature would have left clear damage to the vessel. Perhaps the most scientific explanation, and one that has gained significant traction, is the possibility of an alcohol vapor explosion. The Mary Celeste was carrying over 1,700 barrels of raw alcohol. If some of the barrels had leaked, fumes could have filled the hold. A spark, perhaps from metal rubbing against metal or even a static electricity discharge, could have caused a terrifying but largely non-destructive explosion. A sudden whoosh of flame that would have blown the main hatch open but not necessarily set the ship on fire. Such an event would have been loud and frightening enough to convince a cautious captain that his ship was about to blow apart, prompting him to order everyone into the lifeboat immediately, tethered to the ship by a strong line. The theory posits that the line then snapped in rough weather, leaving the lifeboat to founder in the open ocean while the perfectly sound Mary Celeste sailed on without them. But these are all just theories, educated guesses based on a single moment frozen in time. The true answer may lie not on the deck of the ship, but beneath the waves, waiting for modern technology to finally uncover it. The first step would be to locate the wreck of the Mary Celeste itself. We know she did not sink in 1872. She was salvaged and sailed for 12 more years before being deliberately wrecked for insurance money off the coast of Haiti. Using historical insurance records and ship logs, maritime archaeologists could pinpoint a more precise search area. Once a potential site is identified, the hunt would begin using autonomous underwater vehicles, or a UVS. These deep-sea drones, equipped with high-resolution side-scan sonar and magnetometers, could systematically map the seabed, looking for the distinct magnetic signature of an iron-hulled brig from that era. Finding the wreck would be a monumental discovery, but it's the artifacts around it that could hold the key. The most tantalizing possibility is the recovery of the ship's logbook. We know the last entry was dated November 25th, but if the captain or a crew member made subsequent notes on a slate, that slate, if it settled in a protected, silt-heavy environment, could potentially be preserved. Even if the wooden covers of the logbook have rotted away, the metal binding pins might still be holding the pages together in a compressed but potentially readable stack. Modern conservation techniques, including careful freeze drying and digital multispectral imaging, could allow us to read those pages without even physically separating them, potentially revealing the captain's final thoughts and the reason for the abandonment. Beyond the wreck, another technological approach involves looking not for objects, but modeling the circumstances themselves. Advanced ocean current modeling software, the same kind used to predict oil spill trajectories, could be applied to this historical mystery. By inputting detailed weather data from 1872, scientists could create a high-fidelity simulation of the exact conditions the Mary Celeste and her lifeboat would have encountered. This could test the lifeboat theory with mathematical precision. How fast would the two vessels have drifted apart? Where would the currents have likely taken a small, open boat? This could potentially identify a search area for the lifeboat itself, a tragic yet definitive answer to the fate of Captain Briggs and his family. While the chance of finding physical remains after 150 years is slim, this digital detective work could finally lend powerful credence to one theory over all others, closing the book on one of the sea's most enduring and haunting stories. Isolated in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, presents another monumental mystery. How did a society with no metal tools or wheels and with a limited population quarry, transport, and erect nearly 900 massive stone statues, some weighing over 80 tons? The Moai, with their solemn, elongated faces and imposing presence, stand as silent sentinels to a sophisticated culture, yet their creation has long been cited as a cautionary tale of ecological collapse. The conventional story suggests the islanders became so obsessed with statue building that they cut down all their trees to use as rollers and sledges, leading to their own societal ruin. But this narrative is being completely upended by modern experiments that are testing ingenious theories with real-world physics. One of the most captivating and visually striking theories is that the Moai were made to walk. Proposed by archaeologists Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo, this method involves a dynamic rocking motion. Imagine a team of ropes attached to the top of a giant statue. By pulling one side forward and then the other in a careful, coordinated rhythm, the teams could make the Moai rock from side to side, effectively walking it forward in a swaying gait. This isn't just a wild idea, it was demonstrated on a National Geographic documentary using a concrete replica. The result was startlingly effective, requiring a relatively small group of people to move a multi-ton statue in a way that seems almost alive. This theory also handily explains the many broken Moai found along the ancient roads. A mistake in the rhythm or an unexpected shift in weight could have sent a statue crashing face first into the ground, snapping it at the neck, which is exactly how many are found. An alternative, more gradual method is the horizontal sled theory, which suggests the statues were laid flat on a large wooden sled called a sledge, which was then pulled along a path of lubricated log. Experiments have shown that sweet potatoes or other tubers mashed into a slippery paste could have acted as an effective lubricant, drastically reducing the friction and the number of people needed to pull the colossal weight. This method seems less risky than the vertical walk, but requires a significant amount of wood and other resources for the sled and the track. This is where experimental archaeology, supercharged by modern tools, moves beyond mere demonstration and into the realm of definitive proof. Researchers are no longer limited to building one heavy replica for a single test. Using high-resolution 3D laser scanning of actual Moai, they can create incredibly precise digital models. These digital twins can then be used to 3D print scaled-down but perfectly proportional replicas in a variety of materials. This allows for rapid, low-cost testing of different transport methods. Is the walking method more efficient with a broader base? Does a certain statue shape work better on a sled? These questions can be answered not with years of carving, but with days of printing and an afternoon of experimentation. The real game changer, however, is sensor technology. Imagine equipping a full-scale concrete replica with a network of tiny, wireless strain gauges and inertial measurement units. As teams attempt to walk or drag the statue, these sensors would collect real-time data on the immense forces at play, the exact amount of tension on each rope, the G-forces acting on the statue's center of gravity, and the precise point of maximum stress on its fragile neck. This data is crucial. It would tell us with scientific certainty if the walking method was a viable, repeatable practice or an impossibly delicate maneuver that would have led to constant breakage. It could identify the exact number of people required and the most efficient pulling rhythm, transforming anecdotal hypothesis into quantifiable engineering data. Furthermore, LiDAR mapping of the island's ancient transport roads is revealing their exact topography. By integrating this detailed terrain data with the force information from the sensor-laden replicas, scientists can run sophisticated computer simulations. They can model the energy expenditure required to move a 70-ton Moai up and down the actual hills of Rapa Nui using each proposed method. This wouldn't just tell us if it was possible, it would tell us which method was the most likely based on the resources and manpower the islanders actually had available. The answer to how the Moai moved is no longer buried solely in the past. It's being unearthed through a combination of traditional ingenuity, cutting-edge fabrication, and data-driven analysis that is finally giving voice to the incredible engineering achievements of the Rapa Nui people. From the open ocean and remote islands, we now turn to a mystery that played out in the silent, stone corridors of French power, the enduring enigma of the man in the iron mask. For over 3 centuries, this figure has been the stuff of legend, immortalized by Alexander Dumas and countless other storytellers. The historical facts, as best we know them, are these. In the late 17th century, a prisoner of utmost importance was transferred between French prisons, most famously to the Bastille, under the watchful eye of King Louis XIV's minister. His identity was concealed at all times by a mask, which historical documents describe as being of black velvet, though legend later embellished it into an intimidating contraption of iron. He was treated with a strange mix of deference and extreme security. His needs were met, but his face was never to be seen, and his name was never to be spoken. He died in 1703, and his cell was immediately stripped bare, his belongings burned, and the very walls were scraped and whitewashed to erase any trace of him. His name was recorded in the burial register only as Marchioli, and with that, one of history's greatest secrets was sealed. The fascination, of course, lies in the question of who this man was and what he knew that required such an extraordinary punishment. The theories are a who's who of French and European intrigue. The most popular candidate is Eustache Dorger, a valet who may have been privy to a devastating secret involving a politically explosive royal affair. Another compelling theory suggests he was the king's own older, illegitimate brother, whose very existence posed a threat to the Sun King's divine right to rule. Other candidates include a disgraced general, a fallen nobleman who knew of the king's true parentage, or even the biological father of Louis XIV himself. Each theory is a tantalizing piece of historical gossip, but without physical evidence, they remain just that, stories. This is where modern forensic science could finally force the past to give up its secret. The first and most critical step would be to locate the skeletal remains of the prisoner known as Moai. We know he was buried in the St. Paul Cemetery in Paris, but the exact location, like so much else about him, was lost to time and urban development. However, the area is not an entirely unknown quantity. Using historical maps and architectural plans, archaeologists could narrow down a potential search zone. Ground-penetrating radar could then be deployed to survey the area, searching for anomalies in the soil that match the size and depth of a coffin from that period. Finding any set of remains from the right era would be a challenge, but one with a potential monumental payoff. If a skeleton were to be discovered, the most immediate and powerful analysis would be a full DNA extraction. By sequencing the genetic code from the bones, scientists could answer the most fundamental question: was this man related to the House of Bourbon? They could compare the DNA to that of known, verified descendants of King Louis XIV. A direct match would immediately confirm a theory of royal lineage, potentially proving he was a hidden twin or a disgraced uncle. Even a more distant familial link would be a massive breakthrough, narrowing the list of candidates to those within the vast royal family tree. Conversely, if no genetic link to the French monarchy was found, it would effectively rule out the most sensational royal theories and pivot the investigation toward the other candidates, like the valet doge. Beyond DNA, the skeleton itself is a biography written in bone. A detailed osteological analysis could reveal the man's age at death, his general health, and any old injuries or signs of disease. Did he suffer from conditions associated with a life of luxury or a life of hard labor? This physical profile could then be compared to the known histories of the suspects. Furthermore, isotopic analysis of his teeth and bones could reveal where he spent his childhood. Different regions have unique chemical signatures in their water and food, which are absorbed into our bodies. If the isotopes point to a childhood spent not in France, but in Italy or England, it could immediately corroborate or dismantle specific theories about his origin. Perhaps the most visually compelling application of technology would be a forensic facial reconstruction. Using the actual skull, forensic artists could employ a technique called facial approximation. This process involves using the unique contours of the skull, the placement of the eye sockets, the width of the nasal aperture, the prominence of the cheekbones, to reconstruct the likeness of the face that once covered it. By using CT scans to create a precise digital model of the skull, artists can then digitally sculpt the layers of muscle and tissue, building up a face that is not a guess but a scientific approximation. To see the face of the man in the iron mask, to look into the eyes of the man whose identity was so dangerous it had to be hidden from the world, would be a moment of breathtaking historical connection. It would not be a portrait painted by a court artist, but a likeness forged from his own bones. When combined with the DNA and isotopic evidence, this face could finally be matched to a name in the historical record, silencing 300 years of speculation and granting this most famous of prisoners the one thing he was denied in life: an identity. Plato's story of Atlantis stands apart from every other mystery we've explored, because it all begins not with an artifact or a ruin, but with a philosophical parable. Around 360 BC, the Greek philosopher Plato penned two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, in which he describes a powerful island kingdom located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which we know today as the Strait of Gibraltar. According to his account, Atlantis was a marvel of engineering and culture, a circular metropolis of concentric rings of land and water, brimming with rare metals and advanced technology. But its people grew arrogant and warlike, and in a single terrible day and night of earthquakes and floods, the entire island was swallowed by the sea, vanishing forever. The big question that has fueled debate for millennia is this: was Plato crafting a purely fictional allegory about the dangers of hubris, or was he recording a distorted memory of a real catastrophic event that destroyed a sophisticated Bronze Age civilization? The search for a real Atlantis has taken explorers and researchers to every corner of the globe. One of the most compelling candidates is the volcanic Greek island of Santorini. Around 1600 BC, a cataclysmic eruption, one of the largest in human history, tore the island apart, utterly devastating the sophisticated Minoan civilization that thrived there. The Minoans were a sea power with advanced plumbing and architecture, a clear parallel to Plato's description. The eruption would have generated tsunamis powerful enough to wipe out coastal cities on Crete, and the resulting ash cloud would have plunged the region into a temporary darkness, matching the night of destruction. The main hiccup in this theory is location. Plato was very specific about Atlantis being in the Atlantic Ocean, not the Mediterranean. This has led other researchers to look westward. Some point to the Richat structure in Mauritania, a natural geological formation that, when viewed from above, looks astonishingly like Plato's description of concentric rings. Others have suggested locations as varied as the Azores Plateau, Cuba, or even Antarctica, theorizing that shifts in the Earth's crust could have moved a temperate island to a frozen wasteland. Each theory tries to align geological evidence with Plato's clues, but without physical proof, they remain intriguing possibilities. This is where modern marine technology is transforming a literary hunt into an archaeological one. The first and most powerful tool is satellite-derived bathymetry. Specialized satellites use radar altimeters to measure the minute variations in the height of the ocean surface. Because water gravitates slightly toward massive structures on the seafloor, these subtle sea level discrepancies can be used to create highly detailed maps of the underwater landscape. This technology has already revealed countless previously unknown seamounts and trenches. For Atlantologists, it provides a way to scan vast areas of the Atlantic floor, from the coastal shelves of Spain and Morocco to the mid-Atlantic ridge, looking for any large, unnatural geometric shapes or plateaus that could be the sunken remains of an island city. If satellite data reveals a promising anomaly, the next phase of the investigation would employ underwater LiDAR. While traditional LiDAR uses laser pulses from aircraft to map land features through vegetation, aquatic LiDAR systems use blue-green lasers that can penetrate water to significant depth. Mounted on a ship or a low-flying aircraft, this system could scan a targeted area of the seafloor, creating a stunningly high-resolution, three-dimensional map. It could distinguish between natural rock formations and the right angles of built walls, the straight lines of roads or the circular patterns of harbors, even if they are buried under layers of sediment. This would be the first real step in moving from a geological curiosity to an archaeological site. The final and most definitive step would involve sending down robotic submersibles. Anomalies pinpointed by LiDAR would be too deep for human divers, but autonomous underwater vehicles are perfectly suited for the task. These robotic probes, equipped with high-definition cameras, powerful lights, and sensitive sonar, could descend to the site and conduct a full visual and acoustic survey. They could fly just meters above the seabed, sending back a live video feed. If they were to find anything resembling worked stone, columns, or artifacts, they could then be instructed to use delicate manipulator arms to retrieve a small sample for analysis. The composition of that sample could be the ultimate proof, confirming not only that a structure is man-made, but also dating it to the Bronze Age timeframe that matches Plato's story. Finding Atlantis would be more than just the discovery of a lost city. It would be a validation of oral history, proving that a catastrophic event of such magnitude could be preserved in memory and myth for thousands of years before being written down. It would force us to completely reconsider the technological capabilities and maritime reach of ancient civilizations. suggesting a forgotten chapter in human history that was literally swallowed by the sea. The search, powered by these incredible technologies, continues to comb the ocean depths, not for a myth, but for the very real kernel of truth that may lie at the heart of one of our greatest stories. On the morning of June 30th, 1908, in a remote part of Siberia near the Podkamennaya Tunguska River, something extraordinary happened. A fireball as bright as a second sun tore across the sky before exploding with a force estimated to be 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The blast flattened over 2,000 square kilometers of forest, snapping 80 million trees like matchsticks and radiating them outward from a central point in a terrifying spoke-like pattern. The shockwave was recorded on barographs as far away as England, and for nights afterward, the skies over Europe and Asia were so bright with suspended dust that people could reportedly read newspapers outdoors at midnight. Yet, despite this display of raw, planet-altering power, no crater was ever found. The object, whatever it was, seemed to have vaporized completely in the atmosphere, leaving behind a mystery that has puzzled scientists for over a century. What exactly caused the Tunguska event? The debate has largely centered on two celestial suspects, a comet or an asteroid. A comet, being a loose agglomeration of ice, dust, and rock, would explain the lack of a crater and any significant debris. It would have disintegrated entirely in a massive airburst. The timing also fits, as the event coincided with the Beta Taurid meteor shower, which is associated with the debris trail of Comet Encke. On the other hand, an asteroid, which is typically a denser, rockier body, could also produce a powerful airburst if it exploded at the right altitude. Proponents of the asteroid theory point to microscopic silicate and magnetite spheres found in the peat of the blast zone, which could be the condensed remnants of a rocky body. For decades, scientists have sifted through the scant evidence, trying to determine the identity of this cosmic interloper based on the environmental scars it left behind. Modern technology is finally providing the tools to settle this debate, and it begins not in Siberia but in space. Sophisticated asteroid tracking programs like NAS, a Near-Earth Object Observations Program, often referred to as planetary defense, continuously scan the skies, mapping the orbits of thousands of potentially hazardous objects. By building a vast and precise database of these orbits, scientists can run sophisticated computer models backwards in time. They can essentially create a digital rewind of the solar system, simulating the gravitational interactions and orbital paths of known comet families and asteroid groups to see if any intersect with Earth's position on that fateful day in 1908. Pinpointing a potential source population would be a massive clue, strongly suggesting whether the object was an icy comet from the outer solar system or a stony asteroid from the belt between Mars and Jupiter. The real smoking gun, however, likely lies buried in the Siberian peat. The immense heat and pressure of the blast would have vaporized the object and infused the soil and tree resin with microscopic particles from its core. For years, searches for these particles were like looking for a needle in a haystack. But today, advanced materials science has given us the equivalent of a powerful magnet. Researchers can now take core samples from the peat bogs, which act as a natural layer cake preserving history. Using techniques like scanning electron microscopy and energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, they can analyze individual microscopic particles at an elemental level. They aren't just looking for anything alien, they are searching for specific mineralogical signatures. If they find lonstellate, a rare diamond-like carbon crystal that only forms under the extreme pressure of an extraterrestrial impact, it would be a clear indicator of an asteroid. Conversely, a high concentration of nitrogen and other volatiles frozen into dust grains could point toward the icy composition of a comet. This forensic analysis of cosmic dust could finally label our culprit. Finally, we can use the power of supercomputers to recreate the event itself in stunning detail. We know the effects, so we can work backward to determine the cause. Advanced hydrocodes, which are computer programs designed to model shock waves and impacts, can simulate the entire entry, explosion, and aftermath. Researchers can input different variables. Was it a stony asteroid 60 meters wide, a smaller iron-rich rock, or a fragile cometary fragment 100 meters across? The simulations model the object's breakup in the atmosphere, the energy release of the airburst, and the resulting ground shockwave that felled the trees. By comparing the simulation's results, the predicted pattern of destruction, the height of the blast, the energy profile against the actual, well-documented tree fall and seismic records from 1908, scientists can see which model fits the real-world data perfectly. The simulation that matches is essentially a digital fingerprint, telling us the approximate size, composition, and strength of the object that caused the largest impact event in recorded history, finally closing the case on a mystery that once seemed as vast and unexplainable as the Siberian wilderness itself. For centuries, the legend of the Ninth Legion has served as a powerful and haunting metaphor for the limits of imperial ambition. A story of a mighty Roman war machine, over 5,000 soldiers strong, marching into the mists of northern Britain and simply vanishing, presumably wiped out by fierce native tribes in a devastating ambush. Popularized by books and films, this narrative paints a dramatic picture of the savage frontier consuming a symbol of civilized order. But how much of this is historical fact and how much is compelling fiction? The truth is far more complex, and modern archaeology is now disentangling the legend from a much more nuanced reality. The Legio Nona Hispana, the 9th Spanish Legion, was indeed a real and formidable unit with a proud history stretching back to Caesar's campaigns in Gaul. It was stationed in Britain at the fortress of Eboracum, modern-day York, and historical records, namely a stone inscription, confirm its presence there as late as 108 AD. Then the trail goes cold. It disappears from the British records and shortly after from the wider Roman military roster. The timing is suspiciously coincidental with the fierce wars fought against the northern tribes during the reign of Emperor Hadrian, feeding the idea of a catastrophic defeat. The traditional theory of annihilation is certainly compelling. The tribes north of the Roman frontier, particularly the Caledonians in what is now Scotland, were known for their ferocity and tactical brilliance in using the rugged, unfamiliar terrain to their advantage. A large-scale ambush of a stretched Roman column on a narrow road could have been devastating. The psychological impact of such a loss would have been immense, explaining why the legion's number was never reinstated, a mark of profound shame. However, many historians point out a significant flaw in this theory: the complete absence of any physical evidence. A battle that erased 5,000 of Rome's finest soldiers, along with their eagles, armor, and equipment, would have left an enormous archaeological signature. Despite extensive searches, no large battlefield site filled with 1st century Roman military artifacts has ever been found in Scotland. The silence of the ground is deafening, suggesting a different fate. A growing body of scholarly opinion now favors the redeployment theory. The Roman Empire was a vast, interconnected organism, constantly shifting its military resources to put out fires along its extensive borders. Records indicate that around the time the 9th vanished from Britain, the empire was engaged in severe conflicts elsewhere, particularly in Judea against the Bar Kokhba revolt and along the Danube frontier. It is entirely plausible that the seasoned veterans of the 9th Legion were transferred from a restive Britain to a critical war zone in the east. If the Legion was subsequently destroyed in one of these foreign campaigns, the records of its demise may simply have been lost to time, its end occurring far from the British mud and mist that legend prefers. This is where technology steps in to investigate both possibilities with a fresh set of eyes. The first tool is LiDAR, which has revolutionized landscape archaeology. By flying over the suspected Roman roads and potential battle sites in northern England and Scotland, LiDAR can digitally strip away the dense forest and undergrowth that has hidden the land for centuries. It is searching for the subtle, geometric outlines of a temporary marching camp large enough to hold a legion, or the telltale straight lines of a prepared ambush position. Finding a previously unknown camp in the far north could trace the legion's final route. More grimly, LiDAR could also detect large, irregular pits, potential mass graves, that have settled over time, creating a visible dip in the microtopography. A discovery like that would be the smoking gun for the annihilation theory. If such a site is found, the next step would be isotopic analysis of any human remains. This technique reads the chemical history locked inside our bones and teeth. The water and food we consume in our childhood leaves a specific geochemical signature based on the local geology. By analyzing the isotopes in the tooth enamel of skeletons found on a battlefield, scientists could determine where these individuals grew up. If a mass grave yielded soldiers with isotope signatures from the sunny, olive-growing hills of Italy or Spain, it would strongly suggest they were Romans, not locals. Furthermore, if those same bones showed perimortem injuries consistent with Roman weaponry, the specific shape of gladius cuts or pilum wounds, it would paint a vivid picture of a desperate last stand. Finally, the digitization of thousands of fragile Roman documents, from military pay records and supply requisitions to personal letters home, is creating a searchable database of the ancient world. Using sophisticated optical character recognition and eye pattern analysis, researchers can scour these texts for any fleeting mention of the 9th Legion after its supposed disappearance. A fragmentary pay record from a fort on the Danube, a letter from a soldier transferred from the 9th to another unit in Judea, or a casual reference in a personal diary could be the tiny piece of evidence that breaks the case wide open. This isn't about finding a single scroll that says the 9th Legion was destroyed here. It is about assembling a mosaic of tiny clues from across the empire that together reveal the unit's final bureaucratic journey. The answer to this 1500-year-old mystery may not lie buried in a Scottish bog, but waiting to be connected in a digitized line of text from a Roman ledger. Etched into the dry, stony plains of southern Peru, the Nazca lines present a mystery on a scale that can only be truly appreciated from the heavens. These gigantic geoglyphs depicting spiders, hummingbirds, monkeys, and intricate geometric shapes were created between 500 BC and 500 AD by removing the dark, sun-baked top layer of pebbles to reveal the lighter-colored sand beneath. For over 2,000 years, they have survived in one of the driest places on Earth, their purpose as elusive as their construction method. The most enduring theories suggest they were either a massive astronomical calendar, aligning with key stars and solstice points to guide agricultural cycles, or a sacred pathway for ritual processions, allowing people to walk the figures to communicate with deities who could see them from the sky. While these ideas are compelling, they have remained largely speculative, constrained by the limitations of studying such vast artworks from ground level. Modern technology, however, is finally granting us the high-altitude perspective needed to start solving these puzzles. The first and most fundamental step has been the creation of a definitive, high-resolution map of every single glyph. For decades, researchers had to rely on painstaking ground surveys and low-quality aerial photographs, making it nearly impossible to see the full context or identify more faint, eroded figures. This changed radically with the advent of drone photography. Squadrons of drones equipped with high-resolution cameras can now fly precise, overlapping grid patterns over the entire 450 square kilometer Nazca Plateau. Using photogrammetry software, these thousands of individual images are stitched together into a colossal, gigapixel resolution digital map. This map is more than just a picture, it's a measurable, three-dimensional model of the entire site. This allows archaeologists to not only catalog every known line with perfect accuracy, but also to discover new, previously invisible geoglyphs that have been faded by time and wind, dramatically expanding the canvas we are trying to interpret. With a complete map in hand, the next question is how these perfect, sprawling shapes were engineered without the ability to fly. The prevailing theory involves a simple but effective scaling technique. The Nazca artists likely created small-scale models of the figures on prepared clay surfaces. They could then transcribe these designs onto the desert floor using a grid system, perhaps employing long ropes and wooden stakes to mark key points and curves at a much larger scale. While this explains the proportionality, it doesn't fully account for the incredible precision of lines that run dead straight for kilometers across uneven terrain. Here, technology can test the theory through erosion pattern analysis. By using sophisticated software to model 2 millennia of wind and water erosion across the plateau, scientists can simulate how the precise edges of the lines would have degraded over time. If the lines were originally laid out with less precision, the erosion models would show more wobbly, irregular edges today. The fact that the lines remain so starkly defined suggests the initial construction was executed with a level of geometric accuracy that rivals modern surveying, forcing us to reconsider the mathematical and engineering prowess of the Nazca culture. The most tantalizing application of technology involves testing the astronomical alignment theory with absolute certainty. For years, researchers would manually check alignments of specific lines against the rising or setting points of the sun or stars on specific dates, a slow and often subjective process. Now, virtual reality and advanced astronomical software can remove all doubt. Archaeoastronomers can input the exact latitude, longitude, and elevation of every major geoglyph into planetarium software that can recreate the precise night sky over the Nazca Desert for any year in the past. Wearing a VR headset, a researcher can stand virtually on the plateau at dawn on the summer solstice in 200 AD and watch exactly where the sun rises in relation to a specific trapezoid or animal figure. They can fast forward through entire years, observing if the tail of the monkey consistently points toward a certain star cluster, or if the long axis of a rectangle frames the Milky Way on a specific night. This allows for a comprehensive, data-driven survey of potential alignments, moving beyond cherry-picked examples to either confirm a sophisticated celestial calendar or definitively rule it out, forcing us to look for answers more grounded in ritual and spirituality. Ultimately, these technologies are converging to answer the deepest question: why? If VR and software confirm celestial alignments, it would solidify the Nazca as brilliant astronomers. If not, the focus may shift to the experiential aspect of the lines. Using spatial analysis tools on the digital map, researchers can now trace potential processional routes, modeling how people might have walked the lines during ceremonies. By analyzing the acoustics of the desert basin and the placement of the figures, some scientists are even investigating if the act of walking these giant pathways created specific sound vibrations or echoes that were considered part of the ritual, a form of communication with the gods through both sight and sound. The true purpose of the Nazca lines likely lies in a combination of these elements: a profound connection to the cosmos, expressed through giant artworks meant for divine eyes, and walked by a people seeking to leave their mark not just on the land, but on the very fabric of their universe. No object in the world inspires such a potent mix of faith, skepticism, and scientific curiosity as a simple piece of linen cloth kept in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy. The Shroud of Turin is a 14-foot-long herringbone weave textile that bears the faint, haunting image of a crucified man, front and back, complete with wounds that eerily align with the biblical accounts of the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth. For millions of faithful, it is the very cloth that wrapped his body in the tomb, a divine relic imprinted by a miraculous burst of energy at the moment of resurrection. For skeptics, it is a masterful, albeit mysterious, medieval forgery. The debate reached a fever pitch in 1988 when radiocarbon dating performed by 3 independent laboratories dated a sample of the cloth to between 1260 and 1390, seemingly settling the matter as a clever hoax from the Middle Ages. But instead of closing the case, that result only opened a new chapter because numerous other pieces of evidence simply refused to fit that timeline, creating a scientific paradox that only more advanced technology can hope to solve. The controversy surrounding the carbon dating itself is a perfect example of why this mystery endures. Critics of the 1988 study point to the sample location, taken from a corner of the shroud that was heavily handled and possibly mended over the centuries. They argue that this area could have been contaminated by carbon from later periods, or worse, that it was actually part of a clever, nearly invisible medieval repair using a technique called French weaving, which would skew the results. Newer, non-destructive dating methods could finally put this argument to rest. Techniques like spectroscopy, which analyzes the way the cloth interacts with light, can now assess the age of the linen's cellulose fibers across the entire shroud without ever cutting a piece away. By measuring the level of chemical degradation and comparing it to textiles of a known age, scientists could create a chemical clock, providing a second opinion on the carbon dating that either confirms the medieval timeline or spectacularly challenges it. Beyond dating the cloth itself, the real focus has shifted to the image. How was it created? This is the central question, and the answer seems to defy simple explanation. The image is not painted, there are no pigments, no brush strokes, and it only penetrates the very topmost fibers of the threads, a depth of mere microns. It has the qualities of a perfect photographic negative, a concept unknown in the medieval world. To understand it, researchers have turned to incredibly high-resolution, multi-spectral imaging. In the 2010 STIRP project follow-up studies, teams used advanced spectral cameras to analyze the shroud in wavelengths far beyond visible light, from ultraviolet to infrared. This allows them to create a complete chemical map of the surface, distinguishing between the image fibers, blood stains, water stains, and scorch marks from a fire in 1532. This data is crucial because it could identify the specific chemical process that caused the discoloration on the fibers. Was it a slow, deliberate application of a subtle acid? Or does the signature point to a rapid, superficial caramelization of the cellulose sugars, consistent with a brief, intense burst of light or radiation? The spectral signature holds the key. Perhaps the most direct evidence comes from clues that were trapped on the cloth for centuries, waiting for the right technology to be noticed. Pollen analysis has been a particularly fascinating avenue. The late Israeli botanist Avinoam Danan examined dust and pollen grains vacuumed from the shroud and identified several plant species that are native to a very specific region, the area around Jerusalem. Some of these plants only bloom in the spring, aligning with the Passover timeframe of the crucifixion. While critics argue that pollen can be transferred over time, the combination and specificity are compelling. Today, DNA analysis could take this much further. By sequencing the ancient DNA from these same dust particles, scientists could potentially identify the geographic origin of the other organic matter, microbes, plant fragments, even skin cells lodged in the linen. A genetic profile pointing overwhelmingly to the Levant would be difficult to reconcile with a medieval European origin for the cloth. The ultimate test may involve not just analyzing what's there, but attempting to recreate the image itself. If the shroud is a medieval forgery, then a modern artist using period-accurate techniques should be able to replicate it. Yet, despite decades of effort, no one has successfully reproduced all of the shroud's unique characteristics. The three-dimensionality of the image encoded in its fiber density, the absence of pigments, and the precise nature of the blood stains. The most promising modern theory suggests the image was formed by a Maillard reaction, a chemical process between amine groups from a body and carbohydrate groups in the linen, essentially a natural browning process. Researchers are now using complex physics modeling and precision lasers to see if they can simulate this effect on ancient linen, controlling for variables like time, humidity, and energy output. If they can create a patch of linen that, under high-resolution spectral analysis, is chemically and physically identical to a corresponding patch on the shroud, they will have not just a theory but a viable mechanism. Until then, the Shroud of Turin remains an enigma, a puzzle where faith and science intersect, and where every technological advance brings us closer to understanding a mystery that has, for centuries, defied explanation. For generations, the name El Dorado has been synonymous with the ultimate, unattainable prize, a legend born not of a city, but of a man. The Gilded One was actually a Muisca chieftain in what is now Colombia, who, during a coronation ceremony, would coat his body in gold dust and wash it off in a sacred lake as an offering to the gods. Spanish conquistadors, their imaginations fevered by greed, heard fragments of this ritual and twisted it into a vision of a metropolis paved with gold, a city of untold wealth hidden deep in the uncharted heart of the South American jungle. This myth launched centuries of futile and bloody expeditions, from the disastrous journey of Francisco de Orellana, who was swept along the entire length of the Amazon searching for it, to the tragic folly of Sir Walter Raleigh, who led 2 costly missions in search of the legendary Manoa. Countless lives were lost, empires were drained of their treasure, and all for a place that, as a literal city of gold, almost certainly never existed. Yet, the enduring power of the legend hints at a deeper truth, that it was a magnificent distortion of real, incredibly wealthy cultures, and modern technology is now mapping the glittering reality behind the gilded myth. The key to unraveling this mystery lies not in searching for a single golden city, but in identifying the networks of trade, ceremony, and power that generated such vast quantities of precious metal. The Muisca Confederation in the Colombian highlands was indeed fabulously rich in gold, renowned for their exquisite lost wax casting technique that produced stunning votive offerings. Farther south, cultures like the Tarona built incredible stone-terraced cities like Ciudad Perdida in the Sierra Nevada, trading across vast distances. El Dorado wasn't a place on a map, it was a European misinterpretation of a continent-wide phenomenon of gold-working sophistication. The real treasure is understanding the scope and connection of these advanced societies, and that is a task perfectly suited for the tools of the 21st century. The first and most revolutionary tool is satellite spectroscopy. Specialized satellites equipped with sensors can now analyze the reflection of light off the Earth's surface across hundreds of wavelengths, far beyond what the human eye can see. This creates a unique spectral signature for every material. By training these sensors on the dense rainforest canopies of Colombia, Peru, and Brazil, scientists can search for the distinct spectral fingerprint of gold. They aren't looking for treasure chests, but for the signs of ancient alluvial gold mining, subtle alterations in the soil chemistry and vegetation health that persist for centuries. A patch of forest with a slightly different spectral signature could indicate an area where the Earth was turned over long ago to sift for gold dust, potentially pinpointing the very sites that supplied the raw material for the legend of the Gilded Man. However, the jungle is a master of concealment, its canopy hiding the ground below. This is where jungle-penetrating radar, specifically LiDAR, becomes indispensable. Deployed from aircraft, LiDAR's laser pulses can digitally slice through the thickest vegetation, mapping the ground surface with astonishing precision. In recent years, this technology has already proven its worth, revealing the sprawling urban network of the Mayan megalopolis and the intricate settlements of the Mosquitia region in Honduras. In the search for the origins of El Dorado, LiDAR is surveying the regions around known Muisca and Tarona sites, looking for the telltale geometric shapes of plazas, roadways, agricultural terraces, and previously undiscovered ceremonial centers that would have been hubs of gold-based trade and ritual. Each new discovery adds another node to the map, slowly illustrating the complex civilization that the Spanish were too single-minded to comprehend. Perhaps the most fascinating application of technology involves turning the conqueror's own records against them. The diaries, letters, and crudely drawn maps created by the Spanish explorers are a chaotic mix of observation, hearsay, and desperate hope. Now, artificial intelligence is being used to find signal in this noise. Researchers are feeding thousands of pages of digitized 16th century documents into natural language processing algorithms. The AI is trained to identify and cross-reference geographic descriptors, mentions of river confluences, unique mountain shapes, distances traveled, and encounters with specific tribes. By comparing these countless fragmented accounts, the AI can create a probability map, highlighting areas where multiple, independent conquistador reports describe signs of great wealth or large populations, cutting through the exaggeration to identify the most likely real-world locations that inspired the tall tales. Ultimately, the quest for El Dorado is being transformed from a treasure hunt into a profound archaeological endeavor. The goal is no longer to find a chest of gold for a museum display, but to digitally reconstruct the economic and spiritual landscape of pre-Columbian South America. By combining the chemical evidence from space, the topographic maps from LiDAR, and the geographic patterns unearthed by AI, we are weaving together the true story. We are learning that El Dorado was real, just not in the way the Spanish imagined. It was a continent rich with culture and innovation. It was a ritual, a sacred act of offering. It was a man transformed for a moment into a living god. The gold was never the point. It was merely the dazzling medium for a message about power and the divine, a message we are finally beginning to hear clearly after 500 years. Yet another legend from the ancient world, the sudden and shocking death of Alexander the Great, has fueled debate for over 2,300 years. In the late spring of 323 BC, the most powerful man in the world was in Babylon, planning new campaigns of conquest. At a banquet, he drank deeply from a cup of wine, cried out with a sudden, sharp pain, and fell gravely ill. For nearly 2 weeks, the 32-year-old king, a paragon of military vigor, suffered a mysterious and agonizing decline, eventually becoming too weak to speak before he passed away. His death sparked immediate suspicion, plunging his vast, hard-won empire into a bloody civil war as his generals tore it apart. The central question has never been settled. Was it a natural disease that felled the young conqueror, or was it a cunning, politically motivated assassination by poison? The natural causes theory points to the brutal realities of ancient life. Alexander had spent over a decade on relentless military campaigns across harsh and unfamiliar territories. He had suffered serious wounds, including a pierced lung in India, and had indulged in the hard drinking culture of his Macedonian court. Modern physicians, analyzing the symptoms described by ancient historians like Plutarch and Arrian, have proposed a long list of potential culprits. These include typhoid fever, which was endemic in the region and could explain his high fever and abdominal pain, malaria, which he could have contracted from mosquitoes in the marshy areas around Babylon, or even acute pancreatitis brought on by excessive alcohol consumption. A more recent and particularly grim theory suggests he may have contracted the neurological disease Guillain-Barré syndrome, which could account for his progressive paralysis and the fact that his body showed no signs of immediate decomposition for several days, a phenomenon the ancients took as a sign of his divinity, but which neurologists note can occur if the brainstem is affected. Breathing stops while the heart continues to beat for a short time. The poisoning narrative, however, is far more dramatic and persistent. The ancient sources themselves are divided, with several pointing the finger at Alexander's trusted general Antipater and his sons. The alleged murder weapon was a poison so rare and powerful it could only be found in the river Styx, a mythical waterway whose very real counterpart in Greece is known to contain highly toxic, corrosive bacteria. The method of delivery was said to be ice-cold poison concealed in a wine cup, which would have been numbingly cold to the lips, masking any bitter taste. The symptoms described acute, tearing abdominal pain, violent convulsions, and a racing fever could align with toxins like white hellebore or strychnine. The motive was clear. Alexander had become an unpredictable, increasingly despotic ruler, and his plans for further campaigns threatened the power of his inner circle. His death was incredibly convenient for those who wished to maintain the status quo and carve up his empire. Resolving this ancient whodunit hinges on evidence that, at first glance, seems forever lost to time. Alexander's tomb, once a major site of pilgrimage in Alexandria, Egypt, has been lost for centuries. However, the possibility remains that his body, or at least his remains, could one day be discovered. If they are, modern forensic toxicology could perform a miracle of historical detection. The first step would be an analysis of the bones and any surviving tissue or hair using neutron activation analysis or mass spectrometry. These techniques are so sensitive they can detect parts per billion traces of heavy metals like arsenic, lead, or mercury that become incorporated into the keratin of hair and the structure of bones. Since hair grows at a known rate, analyzing sequential segments along a single strand could create a timeline of exposure, showing if he received a massive, lethal dose in the final days of his life. Even after millennia, if the remains were preserved in the right conditions, this chemical fingerprint could still be present, providing the first physical proof of assassination. Perhaps the most fascinating modern tool for investigation is one that requires no physical remains at all: medical artificial intelligence. Researchers could feed every known account of Alexander's final illness, every symptom, its progression, and its duration into a diagnostic AI system. This system would be trained on a vast database of thousands of diseases and toxicological profiles. Unlike a human doctor who might be swayed by the most famous theory, the AI would cross-reference this specific constellation of symptoms against every known possibility, weighting each one by its statistical probability. It would consider the geographical location, the season, and even the historical context of available poisons. Would the symptoms better match a rare strain of typhoid or a dose of strychnine? The AI's analysis would provide a data-driven, statistically probable diagnosis, cutting through centuries of bias and speculation. It could potentially identify a forgotten disease that fits the description perfectly, or lend overwhelming weight to the poisoning theory by matching the symptom progression to a specific known toxin. The death of Alexander the Great is more than a historical curiosity. It was the pivot around which the entire ancient world turned. Knowing whether it was a tragic illness or a calculated murder would finally close the book on one of history's most consequential moments, revealing the true end of the man who shaped the world from Greece to the borders of India. Diving from the grand legends of conquest to the intricate world of ancient engineering, we encounter an object that proves the past was far more technologically sophisticated than we ever imagined. Discovered in a Roman-era shipwreck off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera in 1901, the mechanism initially appeared to be little more than a lump of corroded bronze and wood. It wasn't until decades later, when it was examined under an X-ray, that archaeologists realized they were looking at the remains of an incredibly complex clockwork device, a labyrinth of interlocking gears that was so advanced it would not be rivaled for over 1,000 years. Dubbed the world's first analog computer, the Antikythera mechanism has since become one of archaeology's most profound puzzles, a tiny, intricate engine that seems to have fallen out of time itself. For decades, researchers could only guess at its full capabilities based on the few gear teeth and fragments of text visible on the heavily calcified exterior. The prevailing theory suggested it was some form of astronomical calculator, but the sheer density of its mechanical components hinted at a purpose far more wondrous. The true revolution in understanding began with the application of microfocus computed tomography, a form of CT scanning powerful enough to see through the layers of corrosion and reveal the machine's internal architecture in stunning detail. This wasn't just a simple X-ray, it was a non-invasive digital dissection, allowing scientists to build a precise three-dimensional model of every surviving gear, axle, and inscription without ever touching the fragile original. As the digital layers were peeled back, the mechanism revealed itself to be a miniature mechanical cosmos, a bronze oracle designed to predict the movements of the heavens with breathtaking accuracy. The high-resolution scans revealed a device of staggering complexity, featuring at least 30 meshing bronze gears housed in a wooden case no larger than a shoebox. The front dial featured a moving pointer that showed the position of the sun and moon against the Egyptian calendar and the Greek zodiac. But the true genius was on the back, where two spiral dials acted as an astronomical calendar. One of the most remarkable discoveries was a gear train that incorporated a pin and slot device to model the moon's elliptical orbit, perfectly accounting for its variable speed across the sky, a subtlety of celestial mechanics that we once believed was beyond ancient comprehension. This was no simple planetarium. It was a sophisticated mathematical engine that could calculate lunar phases, predict eclipses, and even track the timing of the ancient Olympic Games. The CT data was so detailed that it allowed researchers to read inscriptions that had been hidden inside the clumps of metal for 2,000 years. These weren't just labels, they were a detailed user's manual, etched in tiny Greek letters across the front and back of the device. The text explained what the various dials and pointers displayed, including the movements of the 5 known planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. This revelation was a game-changer, confirming that the mechanism's creators had a sophisticated, heliocentric understanding of the solar system long before Copernicus. The inscriptions also included descriptions of eclipses and even references to the color and expected wind conditions during such events, suggesting it was used not just for astronomy, but also for astrology and navigation. With a complete internal blueprint now available through 3D modeling, the next step is a process of digital reconstruction and comparative analysis. Scientists and engineers are using the scan data to create fully functional, precision-engineered replicas, both digitally and physically. By testing these replicas against precise historical astronomical records, such as Babylonian eclipse logs and Greek star catalogs, they can fine-tune the gear ratios and see if the mechanism's predictions align with the actual celestial events of its time. This process can pinpoint the exact date the device was calibrated for, potentially narrowing down its year of construction to within a single decade. Furthermore, by analyzing the specific astronomical theories embedded in its gearing, such as the use of the Babylonian Saros cycle for predicting eclipses, researchers can begin to trace its intellectual origins. The device's design points towards a potential link to the legendary school of Archimedes in Syracuse, or the famed scholars of Rhodes like Hipparchus, whose work on the moon's motion is directly mirrored in the machine's ingenious pin and slot mechanism. Ultimately, the goal is to move beyond understanding what the mechanism did to understanding why it was built and who used it. Was it a rich man's toy, a teaching tool for a philosophical school, or a vital instrument for navigators and astrologers? The comparative analysis of its functions with the needs of different segments of Greek society could provide the answer. The Antikythera mechanism shatters our preconceptions of ancient technological stagnation. It reveals a forgotten lineage of scientific instrumentation, a world where the boundaries between art, science, and mechanics were seamlessly blended. Solving its mystery doesn't just tell us about one shipwreck's treasure, it rewrites the history of science itself, revealing a glimpse of a path toward a technological revolution that was tragically lost for centuries beneath the waves. Her final flight began with such soaring ambition, a quest to become the first pilot to circumnavigate the globe at the equator. But on July 2, 1937, the world held its breath as radio transmissions from Amelia Earhart's Lockheed Electra turned faint and frantic. Somewhere over the vast, empty expanse of the Central Pacific, near the tiny, then uninhabited island of Nikumaroro, her voice vanished, leaving behind a silence that has spawned decades of speculation. Did she run out of fuel and crash into the ocean, or did she manage to land on a remote atoll, becoming a castaway on a coral reef? For generations, the case was defined by a lack of evidence, but today, a new arsenal of technology is bringing us closer than ever to solving aviation's greatest mystery. One of the most compelling modern investigations centers on a tiny, lonely island in the Phoenix Islands group. The International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery has long championed the Nikumaroro hypothesis based on several intriguing clues. In 1940, a British colonial officer discovered a partial human skeleton on the island, along with a sextant box and a bottle of a herbal liqueur Earhart was known to carry. The bones were initially measured and determined to be male and subsequently lost, seemingly closing that lead. However, modern forensic re-examination of those original measurement files has yielded a stunning conclusion. Using contemporary osteometric analysis software, researchers determined the bone proportions were actually a much better match to a woman of Earhart's height and ethnic background. This finding reignited the search for more physical evidence. This is where DNA analysis offers a second chance. Expeditions to Nikumaroro have since recovered several small, fragmentary bones from a site known as the Seven Site, where campfire remnants and American artifacts from the 1930s were also found. The challenge is that decades of exposure to a tropical environment have severely degraded any organic material. Standard DNA sequencing techniques are often useless on samples this old and damaged. But the latest advancement, known as next-generation sequencing, can work with these tiny, shattered pieces of DNA. This hypersensitive method can sequence every single DNA fragment in a sample and then use powerful bioinformatics software to reassemble the genetic puzzle, filtering out the overwhelming amount of bacterial and environmental DNA to find the minuscule human trace. If even one of these bone fragments can be definitively linked to a known relative of Amelia Earhart, it would provide the tragic yet definitive answer that she died as a castaway. While the island search continues, a parallel effort is focused on finding the aircraft itself on the ocean floor. The area west of Nikumaroro features a steep underwater cliff that plunges into the abyss, a likely impact point if the plane ditched nearby. Searching this immense, deep terrain was once an impossible task, but it is now the domain of autonomous underwater vehicles. These torpedo-shaped drones, equipped with high-resolution synthetic aperture sonar, can methodically map the seabed with incredible clarity, distinguishing between natural rock formations and man-made objects. In a recent expedition, the team from Ocean Infinity deployed multiple AUVs that covered over 5,000 square miles of seabed. Their sonar data is so rich that analysts can now examine three-dimensional models of the seafloor on their computers, rotating and zooming in on any potential target. While the Electra hasn't been found yet, each scan narrows the search area, systematically eliminating possibilities in a way that was unimaginable just a decade ago. Perhaps the most surprising technological angle involves re-examining old evidence with new eyes. A photograph taken by a British officer 3 months after Earhart's disappearance during an overflight of Nikumaroro has long been part of the mystery. It shows a blurry, ambiguous object on the reef edge. For years, it was dismissed as a geologic formation. However, forensic image experts are now applying a powerful form of artificial intelligence known as convolutional neural networks to this and other historical images. These AIs are trained on millions of photographs of wrecked aircraft, coral reefs, and shadows. They can analyze the Nikumaroro photo at a pixel level, detecting subtle patterns, textures, and shapes that the human visual cortex is not equipped to recognize. The AI doesn't see a plane. It calculates the probability that a specific cluster of pixels aligns with the known metallurgical properties and geometric shape of a Lockheed Electra's fuselage or wing. It's a digital forensic tool that can, in essence, peer back through time, offering a data-driven opinion on whether that shadowy blur is just a rock or the final resting place of a legend. The search for Amelia Earhart is no longer just a romantic historical quest. It is a rigorous, multidisciplinary investigation that straddles forensic anthropology, marine robotics, and computer science. Each technological thread, from the genetic secrets locked in a piece of coral-crusted bone to the algorithmic analysis of an 80-year-old photograph, brings us closer to closing this chapter. Solving this mystery would do more than just pinpoint a location on a map. It would provide a profound sense of closure to a story that has captivated the world, finally revealing the fate of a pioneer who dared to push the boundaries of the possible. Perched on a barren hilltop in southeastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe doesn't just challenge our understanding of the past, it shatters it completely. This sprawling complex of carved stone rings and towering, anthropomorphic T-shaped pillars is not the work of a Bronze Age empire or even a settled agricultural society. Astonishingly, it was built around 11,600 years ago by hunter-gatherers, a full 6,000 years before Stonehenge and 5,000 years before the first pyramids of Egypt. This timeline turns the traditional narrative of human progress on its head. We have long believed that agriculture came first, providing the surplus food and settled communities that then allowed for the development of complex religion, social hierarchy, and monumental architecture. Göbekli Tepe defiantly suggests the opposite, that the urge to come together for a shared spiritual purpose may have been the very catalyst that inspired humanity to invent farming and settle down. The question is not just who built it, but how, and what drove them to undertake such a Herculean task without the wheel, metal tools, or even a permanent village to call home. The identity of these Neolithic architects is one of the greatest puzzles in archaeology. The site itself offers no obvious homes or graves, suggesting the builders were seasonal visitors who traveled great distances to participate in its construction and ritual use. The sophistication of the carvings, featuring detailed reliefs of animals like foxes, scorpions, vultures, and lions, points to a sophisticated symbolic world and a level of artistic skill we never attributed to pre-agricultural peoples. Who were these people? What kind of social structure allowed them to organize such a massive project? Did a powerful shaman or a council of elders direct the work? Or was it a more egalitarian effort, a communal gathering of different bands who shared a common mythology? The stones are silent on these details, but modern science is developing new ways to make them speak. The first crucial tool in this investigation is the ongoing refinement of radiocarbon dating. The initial dates that stunned the world were derived from organic materials like charcoal and animal bones found in the fill used to bury the site around 8000 BC. But scientists are now applying more advanced accelerator mass spectrometry techniques to even smaller, more specific samples. By dating the calcium carbonate crusts that have formed on the buried pillars since their excavation, researchers can get a more precise reading on when the stone was first quarried and exposed to the elements. Even more promising is the dating of the plasters and mortars that might have been used in the construction. If any organic materials were mixed into these binding agents, their carbon signature could pin down the exact year or even season that a particular pillar was erected, allowing us to build a precise chronology of the entire complex's decades-long construction. While carbon dating tells us when, tool mark analysis tells us how. The limestone pillars, some weighing over 20 tons, were quarried from nearby bedrock and intricately carved without metal chisels. For a long time, we could only guess at the specific tools used. Now, archaeologists are using high-resolution 3D laser scanners to create digital models of the carving surfaces. These models can be analyzed with software that measures the exact width, depth, and cross-section of every individual chisel stroke and pounding mark. This digital microscopy can distinguish between the wear patterns left by a flint tool versus one made of harder obsidian. It can even identify the unique signature of a tired worker's slip or a master carver's confident hand. By comparing these micro marks with experimental replications made using replica Neolithic tools, researchers can reverse engineer the entire toolkit, from the picks used to quarry the stone to the fine berrins used to incise the delicate animal figures. This transforms our understanding from abstract speculation into a concrete knowledge of their engineering and artistic process. Perhaps the most direct path to identifying the builders lies not with the stones but with the people themselves. The key will be genetic analysis of any human remains found in the immediate region. While no graves have been discovered at Göbekli Tepe itself, likely due to its purely ritual nature, contemporary burials have been found at other sites from the same culture, like Navali Sori. The analysis of ancient DNA from these skeletons is already revealing a complex genetic landscape. Scientists can extract DNA from the petrous bone of the inner ear, which is the densest in the body and often preserves genetic material best. By sequencing this ancient DNA, they can determine these individuals' ancestry, tracing their deep origins to different hunter-gatherer populations across Anatolia and the Levant. More importantly, they can look for signs of relatedness. If individuals buried at different sites around Göbekli Tepe show close familial links, it would prove that a wide, interconnected network of people, a true culture, was responsible for the temple, not just an isolated group. This genetic map would finally allow us to connect a name, or at least a genetic signature, to the incredible hands that shaped the first known temple on Earth. From the silent, stone-walled enigma of Göbekli Tepe, we shift our focus to a mystery defined not by ancient construction but by modern disappearance, a place where the map itself seems to hold its breath. The Bermuda Triangle, a loosely defined region of the Western Atlantic between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, has become a global byword for the inexplicable. The legend is built on stories of ships and planes that sailed into calm weather and simply vanished without a trace, often failing to send a distress signal. The most famous cases, like the loss of Flight 19, a squadron of 5 U.S. Navy Avenger torpedo bombers on a training mission in 1945, or the disappearance of the commercial cargo ship SS Marine Sulphur Queen in 1963, have been layered with so much speculation and supernatural embellishment that the truth has been almost completely obscured. The popular mythology offers a buffet of fantastical explanations, from alien abductions and underwater UFO bases to temporary rifts in the space-time continuum. But when we strip away the science fiction, what are we left with? The answer lies not in the stars, but in the sea and the sky, and modern science is now equipped with the tools to dissect this legend with cold, hard data. The first step in a scientific investigation is to determine if there is even a genuine mystery to solve. This is where statistical analysis and historical record-keeping are crucial. Lloyd's of London, the world's leading maritime insurer, and the U.S. Coast Guard have both stated unequivocally that the number of ships and aircraft reported missing in the Bermuda Triangle is not significantly greater, proportionally, than in any other similarly trafficked part of the ocean. The area is a major shipping corridor for cruise liners, cargo vessels, and private boats, and it is also prone to sudden and severe weather. The simple law of averages means more incidents will occur there. Many of the most famous cases also lose their eerie quality under closer scrutiny. Flight 19, for instance, was led by an inexperienced flight instructor who became disoriented and mistakenly believed his compasses were malfunctioning. He ignored his more experienced wingmen and led the squadron hundreds of miles out to sea until they ran out of fuel. The "vanished without a trace" narrative often ignores the very human errors of navigation, mechanical failure, and poor judgment that are the most common causes of disasters anywhere in the world. However, to say there is no mystery at all is to ignore the very real and unique environmental challenges this region presents. The ocean here is not a benign swimming pool. It is a dynamic and often violent system, and modern oceanographic sensors are mapping its dangers with unprecedented clarity. One of the most significant factors is the presence of the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest part of the Atlantic Ocean, plunging to depths of over 8,200 meters. A vessel sinking in such profound depths would leave virtually no surface debris, and the wreckage would be scattered across a vast, inaccessible underwater landscape, making discovery nearly impossible. Furthermore, the complex interplay of the Gulf Stream, a powerful, warm, and fast-moving current, with other ocean currents can quickly erase any evidence of a disaster, sweeping flotsam and life rafts far away from the original site before search and rescue operations can even begin. Perhaps the most compelling scientific explanation for sudden, catastrophic loss involves a phenomenon that sounds like it belongs in a thriller novel, but is very much real: methane hydrate eruptions. On the seafloor of various continental shelves, including parts of the Bermuda Triangle, vast deposits of methane gas are trapped in a crystalline ice-like form under immense pressure. Geological seismic surveys have confirmed their presence. If an underwater landslide or a shift in tectonic pressure destabilizes these deposits, the solid hydrates can rapidly sublimate, turning directly into a colossal volume of gas. This gas erupts upward in a massive bubble plume, rising toward the surface. The effect on a ship caught above such an eruption would be instantaneous and terrifying. As the bubbles reach the surface, they drastically reduce the density of the water. A ship relies on the water's buoyancy to stay afloat. If that water is suddenly filled with gas, it effectively turns to froth. The vessel would lose all buoyancy and could sink in a matter of seconds without time for a distress call. This theory is not just speculative. Laboratory experiments and scaled-down demonstrations have proven its devastating feasibility. Adding to the maritime peril are the atmospheric conditions unique to the region. The Bermuda Triangle is a breeding ground for sudden and explosive weather events that can be invisible to the naked eye and undetectable to older forecasting systems. The most dangerous of these are microbursts or bombs, rapidly intensifying storms that can generate hurricane-force winds and waves over 50 feet high, yet may be less than a few miles across. Today, advanced satellite-based synthetic aperture radar can peer through cloud cover to measure wave height and surface wind speed with pinpoint accuracy, detecting these rogue weather events as they form. In the past, a ship or plane could have flown directly into the heart of such a storm with little to no warning. Modern weather pattern simulations, run on supercomputers, can now recreate the specific atmospheric conditions of historical dates when disappearances occurred. By inputting global weather data from archives, these simulations can often identify the likely presence of a freak storm that would have been a complete surprise to a captain or pilot relying on the weather reports of the 1940s or 50s. The final piece of the puzzle involves not the environment but human perception. The area is also known for its frequent and disorienting magnetic anomalies. The Earth's magnetic North Pole and true geographic North Pole are not in the same location, and the difference between them, magnetic variation, must be accounted for in navigation. In the Bermuda Triangle, there are several documented areas where compasses behave erratically due to local magnetic fields in the seafloor rock. While modern GPS has rendered these anomalies mostly harmless, for decades of aviators and mariners relying on magnetic compasses, a sudden, unexplained swing of the needle could have been enough to send them fatally off course, especially when combined with other factors like a fast-moving weather front or the featureless expanse of the open ocean. The legend of the Bermuda Triangle is a powerful story, but it is a story being systematically dismantled by a fleet of robotic ocean gliders, a network of weather satellites, and supercomputers running complex fluid dynamics models. The truth is not found in the pages of a paranormal paperback, but in the data streams of science, revealing a place that is dangerous not because it is cursed, but because nature, in all its raw and powerful complexity, demands a healthy respect. Emerging from the fog of the San Francisco Bay Area in the late 1960s, the Zodiac Killer weaponized not just a gun and a knife, but the media itself, crafting a persona of pure intellectual terror that has haunted the American consciousness for over half a century. In a series of brutal attacks beginning in 1968, he targeted young couples in secluded lovers' lanes, his violence seemingly random yet meticulously calculated for maximum psychological impact. After each crime, he mailed a piece of his victim's clothing to a local newspaper along with one of his now infamous ciphers, taunting the police and the public with promises of more killings to come. He claimed a body count of 37, though only 5 are definitively linked to him. His reign of terror was defined by these communications, a mix of bragging, detailed descriptions of his crimes, and complex cryptograms that he challenged the world to solve. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, the letters stopped and the Zodiac faded back into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of grief, fear, and one of the most vexing unsolved cases in American history. The heart of the Zodiac mystery lies in his unbreakable codes and the tantalizing physical evidence he left behind. Of the 4 ciphers he sent, only one, the relatively simple 408 symbol cipher, was cracked by a civilian couple within a week of its publication. The others, particularly the 340-character Z340 cipher, resisted all attempts at decryption for 51 years. It was finally solved in 2020 by a team of private citizens using modern computing power, but its contents were anticlimactic, more rambling, self-aggrandizing text with no identifying clues. This leaves the possibility that his other unsolved messages, like the Z13 and Z32 ciphers, which are too short for traditional frequency analysis, could still hold the key to his identity. Furthermore, the killer was surprisingly careless at the scene of the Paul Stine murder in San Francisco, where he left a wealth of forensic evidence. He licked the stamps and envelopes on his letters, and on one communication he left a bloody palm print. For decades, the technology to analyze these clues was simply not sophisticated enough to provide a definitive answer. This is where the same revolutionary techniques that identified the Golden State Killer are being brought to bear on the Zodiac case. The most promising avenue is forensic genetic genealogy. Investigators have reportedly extracted a full DNA profile from the saliva on the stamps and envelopes of the Zodiac's letters. This DNA does not need to belong to the killer himself. It could be from a relative who licked the stamp for him, a scenario that would still be incredibly revealing. This genetic profile can be uploaded to public genealogical databases like GEDmatch. Instead of looking for a direct match, investigators build out a vast family tree from the pool of the killer's distant relatives, 3rd, 4th, or 5th cousins who have also taken consumer DNA tests. By painstakingly constructing this family tree and cross-referencing it with historical records, they can narrow the list of potential suspects down to a manageable number, eventually leading them to the one individual who fits the timeline, location, and physical description. This meticulous process of building a family tree backward from distant relatives is how Joseph DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, was finally identified and arrested in 2018, proving that a decades-old cold case is not necessarily a hopeless one. If the DNA is too degraded for a full profile, a newer, even more futuristic technology comes into play: DNA phenotyping. This process uses genetic markers to predict a person's physical appearance. Advanced algorithms can analyze the DNA sample to create a probabilistic snapshot of what the contributor likely looked like, predicting their eye color, hair color, skin tone, freckling, and even facial structure. Companies like Paraben Nanolabs have achieved remarkable results with this technology, creating composite sketches from DNA that have helped focus investigations. For the Zodiac, who was glimpsed by survivors and is described in police sketches, a DNA phenotype report could either corroborate the existing artist's renderings or completely overhaul our perception of what he looked like, providing a vital new lead for public tips. Finally, the unsolved ciphers present a unique challenge that modern artificial intelligence is uniquely equipped to tackle. Traditional cryptanalysis relies on patterns and frequency counts, which fail with extremely short ciphers. However, machine learning algorithms can approach the problem differently. They can be trained on every known cipher and code in history, learning the underlying patterns of human language construction and encryption techniques. An eye doesn't get frustrated. It can run through billions of potential decryption keys and linguistic models in the time it takes a human to drink a cup of coffee. It can test for languages beyond English, look for abbreviations or personal shorthand the killer might have used, and even cross-reference the solved portions of the Zodiac's other letters for stylistic patterns. While the shorter ciphers may never reveal a complete sentence, they could contain an acronym, a set of initials, or a location, a piece of the puzzle so small that only a computer would recognize its significance, but one that could be the final piece needed to point directly at a name in the genealogical database. The combination of these technologies, genealogy, phenotyping, and AI code breaking, forms a triple threat approach that is slowly dismantling the wall of anonymity the Zodiac killer built around himself, bringing us closer than ever to learning the name of the man who thought his puzzles would never be solved. For centuries, the story of the Vikings was one of relentless expansion, of fierce warriors and savvy traders who sailed from their Scandinavian homelands to conquer, settle, and build new communities across the North Atlantic. They established footholds in the British Isles, founded a republic in Iceland, and even built a settlement in North America centuries before Columbus. But one of their most remote and ambitious colonies, the eastern and western settlements in Greenland, did something extraordinary. After thriving for nearly 500 years, it simply ceased to exist. By the middle of the 15th century, the Norse Greenlanders had vanished, leaving behind their stone churches, their farmsteads, and their graves. The silence that followed has echoed through history, leaving us with a haunting question. What happened to the lost Vikings of Greenland? The traditional narratives point to two primary suspects, often presented as a simple either-or scenario. The first is a dramatic shift in climate. The Norse arrived during the medieval warm period, a time when Greenland's southern fjords were, if not exactly green, at least hospitable enough for the pastoral farming they knew. They raised cattle, sheep, and goats, a lifestyle that was precarious but sustainable. Then the Little Ice Age descended. Ice core analysis from Greenland's massive ice sheet provides a stunningly precise record of this change. By drilling deep into the ice, scientists can read the climate's history year by year, much like reading the rings of a tree. These cores show a pronounced and prolonged drop in temperature beginning in the 14th century. This meant shorter growing seasons, longer winters, and increased sea ice that would have severely disrupted the vital trade routes with Iceland and Europe, upon which the Greenlanders depended for iron, timber, and other essentials they couldn't produce themselves. The second suspect is conflict with the incoming Thule people, the ancestors of the modern Inuit. As the climate cooled, the Thule, with their superior adaptation to Arctic life, expanded southward along the coast. Their technology was perfectly suited for the changing world. They hunted large sea mammals like seals and whales from sleek, covered kayaks and umiaks, while the Norse remained stubbornly dependent on their livestock. Did the two cultures clash over dwindling resources like prime hunting grounds and walrus ivory, a valuable trade commodity, Or was their interaction more complex, perhaps a mix of trade, intermarriage, and sporadic violence? The historical record is silent on the details, forcing us to turn to the ground itself for answers. This is where modern archaeology is moving beyond simple theories to build a much more nuanced and tragic story. The key is not to look for a single smoking gun, but for a pattern of gradual decline revealed through a combination of cutting-edge techniques. Excavations at farmsteads like the one known as the Farm Beneath the Sand have been revolutionized by the use of ground-penetrating radar. Before a single trowel touches the soil, GPR can map the entire subsurface layout of a site, revealing the outlines of longhouses, barns, and storage pits, allowing archaeologists to target their digs with surgical precision. At these sites, they are finding a telling story in the bones. Analysis of garbage middens shows a dramatic dietary shift over time. The bones of domestic cattle and pigs, which require large amounts of winter fodder, become increasingly rare, replaced by the bones of seals and caribou. The Vikings, it seems, were being forced to abandon the very farming lifestyle that defined them, becoming more like the hunter-gatherers they may have disdained simply to survive. Perhaps the most promising line of inquiry lies in the search for a genetic answer. If the Norse did not simply die out, did they assimilate with the Thule people? This is a question that DNA analysis is uniquely equipped to answer. Researchers are now conducting extensive genetic studies of modern Inuit populations in Greenland and Canada, looking for markers of European ancestry that date back to the medieval period, predating the arrival of Danish colonists. Finding a clear, widespread genetic signature from the 14th or 15th century would be powerful evidence that a significant number of Norse Greenlanders did not perish, but instead integrated into Thule society, their lineage living on even as their distinct culture and language faded into history. This would transform the narrative from one of a simple disappearance to a more complex story of cultural fusion and adaptation. The ultimate fate of the Greenland Norse appears to be a perfect storm of these factors. They were not wiped out in a single catastrophe, but slowly strangled by a changing world. The cooling climate made their core subsistence strategy untenable, cutting them off from the outside world and the trade that was their lifeline. Facing starvation and isolation, they likely fractured. Some may have held on stubbornly until the end, their cows starving in their barns. Others may have attempted to sail back to Iceland, succumbing to the treacherous, ice-clogged seas. And compelling evidence suggests that a significant number may have chosen the path of survival, casting their lot with the successful Thule hunters, marrying into their families, and ensuring that while the Viking colony of Greenland died, its people did not entirely vanish from the earth. Isolated in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, presents another monumental mystery. How did a society with no metal tools or wheels, and with a limited population, quarry, transport, and erect nearly 900 massive stone statues, some weighing over 80 tons? The Moai, with their solemn, elongated faces and imposing presence, stand as silent sentinels to a sophisticated culture, yet their creation has long been cited as a cautionary tale of ecological collapse. The conventional story suggests the islanders became so obsessed with statue building that they cut down all their trees to use as rollers and sledges, leading to their own societal ruin. But this narrative is being completely upended by modern experiments that are testing ingenious theories with real-world physics. One of the most captivating and visually striking theories is that the Moai were made to walk. Proposed by archaeologists Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo, this method involves a dynamic rocking motion. Imagine a team of ropes attached to the top of a giant statue. By pulling one side forward and then the other in a careful, coordinated rhythm, the teams could make the Moai rock from side to side, effectively walking it forward in a swaying gait. This isn't just a wild idea, it was demonstrated on a National Geographic documentary using a concrete replica. The result was startlingly effective, requiring a relatively small group of people to move a multi-ton statue in a way that seems almost alive. This theory also handily explains the many broken moai found along the ancient roads. A mistake in the rhythm or an unexpected shift in weight could have sent a statue crashing face first into the ground, snapping it at the neck, which is exactly how many are found. An alternative, more gradual method is the horizontal sled theory, which suggests the statues were laid flat on a large wooden sled called a sledge, which was then pulled along a path of lubricated log. Experiments have shown that sweet potatoes or other tubers mashed into a slippery paste could have acted as an effective lubricant, drastically reducing the friction and the number of people needed to pull the colossal weight. This method seems less risky than the vertical walk, but requires a significant amount of wood and other resources for the sled and the track. This is where experimental archaeology, supercharged by modern tools, moves beyond mere demonstration and into the realm of definitive proof. Researchers are no longer limited to building one heavy replica for a single test. Using high-resolution 3D laser scanning of actual moai, they can create incredibly precise digital models. These digital twins can then be used to 3D print scaled-down but perfectly proportional replicas in a variety of materials. This allows for rapid, low-cost testing of different transport methods. Is the walking method more efficient with a broader base? Does a certain statue shape work better on a sled? These questions can be answered not with years of carving, but with days of printing and an afternoon of experimentation. The real game changer, however, is sensor technology. Imagine equipping a full-scale concrete replica with a network of tiny, wireless strain gauges and inertial measurement units. As teams attempt to walk or drag the statue, these sensors would collect real-time data on the immense forces at play, the exact amount of tension on each rope, the G-forces acting on the statue's center of gravity, and the precise point of maximum stress on its fragile neck. This data is crucial. It would tell us with scientific certainty if the walking method was a viable, repeatable practice or an impossibly delicate maneuver that would have led to constant breakage. It could identify the exact number of people required and the most efficient pulling rhythm, transforming anecdotal hypothesis into quantifiable engineering data. Furthermore, LiDAR mapping of the island's ancient transport roads is revealing their exact topography. By integrating this detailed terrain data with the force information from the sensor-laden replicas, scientists can run sophisticated computer simulations. They can model the energy expenditure required to move a 70-ton moai up and down the actual hills of Rapa Nui using each proposed method. This wouldn't just tell us if it was possible, it would tell us which method was the most likely based on the resources and manpower the islanders actually had available. The answer to how the moai moved is no longer buried solely in the past. It's being unearthed through a combination of traditional ingenuity, cutting-edge fabrication, and data-driven analysis that is finally giving voice to the incredible engineering achievements of the Rapa Nui people. Perhaps no other religious artifact has captured the imagination quite like the Ark of the Covenant. Described in the Book of Exodus as a gold-covered acacia wood chest topped with 2 golden cherubim, it was said to be far more than a mere relic. It was the literal throne of God on earth, a vessel of unimaginable power that could part rivers, topple walls, and strike down those who dared to touch it improperly. After its construction under Moses, it was carried before the Israelites for 40 years and eventually housed in the inner sanctum of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. And then, after the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem in 587 BC, it vanishes from the historical record completely. Its fate has been one of the Bible's greatest unanswered questions for over 2 millennia, spawning theories that range from the divinely plausible to the wildly speculative. The most enduring and official tradition comes from Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church claims the Ark has been under its guardianship for 3,000 years, housed within the Chapel of the Tablet, a small treasury adjacent to the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum. Their account, detailed in the national epic the Kebra Nagast, tells of Menelik I, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, who allegedly brought the Ark from Jerusalem to Ethiopia after a priestly switch. For centuries, a single chosen guardian monk has been the only person allowed to see it, and he is appointed for life, never leaving the sacred grounds. This tradition is treated with the utmost seriousness in Ethiopia, making any direct scientific investigation a profound cultural and religious impossibility. This is precisely where non-invasive technology becomes not just useful but essential. While the world may never be granted a direct look inside the Axum Chapel, we can listen to its secrets. Ground-penetrating radar could be deployed around the perimeter of the chapel complex. By sending radar pulses into the ground, researchers could map any subterranean chambers or tunnels that might be connected to the main building. The existence of a hidden underground storage area, for instance, could lend credence to the idea that the artifact was protected through centuries of conflict. Furthermore, muon tomography, the same cosmic ray technology used to find voids in the Great Pyramid, could theoretically be used here. By placing muon detectors around the chapel for an extended period, scientists could create a density map of the interior, potentially revealing the outline of a large, box-like object without ever breaching the walls. A negative result wouldn't disprove the claim, but a positive one would send shockwaves through the archaeological world. Other theories place the Ark's final resting place much closer to its original home. Some scholars suggest it was never taken to Babylon at all, but was hidden by the priestly guardians in a secret chamber deep beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The labyrinth of natural caves and man-made tunnels under this contested holy site is largely unmapped and inaccessible due to intense political and religious sensitivities. Here, advanced technologies like electrical resistivity tomography could be used from known access points. This technique measures subsurface structures by injecting electrical currents into the ground and measuring the resulting potential differences. Different materials, solid rock, voids, metal objects, have different resistivities, allowing researchers to create a three-dimensional map of what lies beneath, potentially identifying a man-made chamber that could house a metallic object. Another compelling hypothesis posits that the Ark was smuggled out of Jerusalem before the Babylonian siege and taken to a cave near the Dead Sea, perhaps even sharing a hiding place with the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. While many caves have been excavated, others remain inaccessible or too dangerous to enter. In these scenarios, drones equipped with LiDAR and high-resolution thermal cameras could be deployed. They could fly into unstable caves, creating precise three-dimensional maps and detecting subtle temperature differences that might indicate the presence of a large, dense object buried just beneath the surface of the cave floor. Should any of these surveys ever identify a promising candidate, the next step would still not require physical excavation. If an object was detected, long-range, non-invasive material analysis could provide the first clues to its composition. For an object purportedly made of gold and wood, this is crucial. Techniques like laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy, or LIBS, could be adapted for long-range use. A carefully aimed laser pulse could vaporize a microscopic amount of material from the object's surface, even from several meters away. The light emitted from this tiny plasma plume could then be analyzed to determine the elemental composition of the target. If this spectral analysis revealed a high concentration of gold and the specific organic signatures of acacia wood, it would be a monumental discovery, providing the first scientific evidence that the object in question is not just any chest, but one that matches the very specific biblical description. The quest for the Ark is a delicate dance between faith and science, where the most powerful tools are those that allow us to seek the truth without ever needing to lay a hand on the object of our search. Standing guard on the Giza Plateau, the Great Sphinx is a monument of undeniable power and profound mystery. With the body of a lion and the head of a human, this colossal statue has gazed eastward for millennia, its stone eyes witnessing the rise and fall of dynasties. But for all its fame, the Sphinx holds a secret that lies at the very heart of Egyptology, its true age. The orthodox view, established by mainstream archaeology, attributes the Sphinx to the pharaoh Khafre, the builder of the second largest pyramid at Giza, placing its construction around 2500 BC. This dating is based largely on its geographical context within Khafre's pyramid complex and the stylistic resemblance of the face to other statues of the king. However, a compelling and controversial challenge to this timeline has emerged, suggesting the Sphinx could be thousands of years older, a relic from a lost and forgotten epoch predating the dynastic Egyptians. The cornerstone of this alternative theory is geological, focusing on the patterns of erosion etched into the Sphinx's limestone core. Geologist Dr. Robert Schoch, after detailed examination in the early 1990s, observed that the statue's body and the walls of the enclosure in which it sits show deep, undulating, vertical weathering patterns. He argued that this type of erosion is not characteristic of wind and sand, which would have created more horizontal, sharp-edged scalloping. Instead, he proposed that this is the unmistakable signature of water precipitation of heavy, prolonged rainfall that would have lashed against the limestone. The problem is, the climate of Egypt has been hyper-arid for the last 5,000 years. To have experienced rainfall heavy enough to cause such deep erosion, the Sphinx would have to date back to a much wetter period, perhaps as far back as 7,000 or even 9,000 years ago, a time when the Sahara was a verdant grassland. This would place its construction in the Neolithic period, long before the recognized dawn of pharaonic civilization. Mainstream Egyptologists counter this argument by pointing to other factors, such as the effects of rising groundwater, salt exfoliation, or even the wind-driven spray from nearby irrigation canals. They also emphasize the overwhelming archaeological context. The Sphinx is nestled within a necropolis unequivocally dated to the 4th dynasty. Statues of Khafre found in nearby temples, along with the alignment of the Sphinx directly with Khafre's Valley Temple and Causeway, create a powerful circumstantial case for its traditional dating. The debate often becomes a classic standoff between hard geology and traditional archaeology, a conflict between what the stones themselves seem to say and what the surrounding human-made artifacts suggest. This is precisely where modern technology is stepping in to act as an impartial referee. The first powerful tool is subsurface imaging radar. By scanning the bedrock around and beneath the Sphinx, scientists can map fissures, cavities, and variations in rock density that are invisible to the naked eye. This data can reveal the subsurface weathering profile, showing how deep the water infiltration and erosion truly goes. If the weathering extends many meters below the current floor level in a pattern consistent with precipitation, it would provide powerful support for the older Sphinx theory. Conversely, if the weathering is more superficial and aligns with known periods of groundwater rise, it would bolster the traditional timeline. This subterranean mapping provides a three-dimensional view of the statue's geological history, moving the debate beyond surface observations. Perhaps the most direct method for resolving the age involves a substance most people would overlook: ancient mortar. While the core body of the Sphinx is carved from a single limestone outcrop, there are numerous restoration patches on its surface, some dating back to pharaonic times. If even a tiny fragment of the original mortar used in the very first ancient repair can be found and carefully extracted, it could be subjected to accelerator mass spectrometry radiocarbon dating. Organic material such as charcoal or plant fibers was often mixed into ancient Egyptian mortar as a binding agent. Carbon dating this material would provide a solid terminus ante quem, a date before which the Sphinx must already have been built and in need of repair. Finding a repair patch with organic material dating to 3000 BC would be a bombshell, proving the statue existed long before copper. Finally, advanced 3D laser scanning is providing a new way to analyze the statue's architecture and wear patterns with microscopic precision. By creating a hyper-detailed digital twin of the Sphinx, researchers can perform virtual measurements and simulations that were once impossible. They can accurately compare the proportions and stylistic features of the face to known statues of copper with mathematical certainty, testing the artistic link. They can also simulate thousands of years of erosion from different forces: wind, water, sand on the digital model to see which simulation produces the wear patterns that most closely match the statue we see today. This computational approach allows us to run the clock backward through simulation, offering a data-driven answer to the question that has divided experts for decades. The mystery of the Sphinx is not just about assigning a date. It is a question about the very origins of civilization itself, and modern science is finally providing the tools to read the story written in its stone. For a king, the greatest threat often does not come from a foreign army, but from within his own bloodline. This was the brutal reality of 15th century England, a stage set for one of history's most enduring and tragic mysteries, the disappearance of the two young princes in the Tower. Following the sudden death of King Edward IV in 1483, his 12-year-old son was proclaimed King Edward V, but his reign was shockingly brief. He and his younger brother, Richard, were placed in the Tower of London, then a royal residence as much as a prison under the protection of their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Within months, their uncle had himself crowned King Richard III, and the boys vanished from public view, never to be seen again. The chilling implication was clear. To secure his stolen throne, Richard had ordered the murder of his own nephews. This accusation, immortalized by William Shakespeare's brilliant Tudor-era propaganda, has branded Richard as one of history's great villains for over 500 years. But is this the whole story, or is it the triumphant narrative of the dynasty that defeated him, the Tudors, who had every reason to paint their predecessor as a monstrous usurper? The truth has been buried for centuries, but modern forensic science is finally providing the tools to exhume it. The case against Richard III is compelling, built on motive, opportunity, and the powerful pen of history. He had everything to gain from their deaths. The boys were living symbols of his brother's legacy and a direct threat to his claim. As long as they lived, they could become a rallying point for rebellion. The Tudor narrative, meticulously crafted under King Henry VII, portrays Richard as a physically and morally deformed tyrant, capable of any atrocity. Sir Thomas More's detailed account, written decades later, even names the alleged murderers, two men named James Tyrrell and Miles Forrest, who supposedly smothered the boys in their sleep and buried them beneath a staircase within the tower. The case is circumstantial but damning, built on the simple, brutal logic of power. Yet, a compelling defense has been mounted by those who believe Richard was the victim of a masterful character assassination. They point out that the most damning accounts were written under the Tudor kings, who needed to justify their own questionable claim to the throne by vilifying the man they overthrew at the Battle of Bosworth Field. Furthermore, Richard never produced the boys to quash the rumors of their death, which is often seen as an admission of guilt. But his defenders argue he may have had other reasons. Perhaps they died of illness naturally, and he was accused anyway, or perhaps they were secretly sent abroad for their own safety. Other potential suspects emerge from the shadows of history. Henry Tudor himself had an equally powerful motive. If he could eliminate the princes after taking the throne, he would remove any rival with a claim stronger than his own. Even the boys' own mother, Elizabeth Woodville, and her powerful family have been considered part of a complex web of conspiracy. The historical record is a fog of propaganda, and for centuries it seemed the truth would never break through. That is, until the discovery of a small chest in the Tower of London in 1674. Workmen renovating the White Tower allegedly found a wooden box containing the skeletons of 2 children. On the orders of King Charles II, these remains were given a royal burial in an urn within Westminster Abbey, labelled as the Lost Princes. For over 250 years they rested there, untouched and unexamined, a silent, enigmatic piece of the puzzle. Then, in 1933, the Abbey granted permission for the urn to be opened. The renowned anatomist Lawrence Tanner and dental surgeon George Northcroft conducted an examination. Their conclusions were tantalizing but frustratingly inconclusive. The bones were of 2 children, one around 10 to 12 years old and the other around 7 to 11, roughly matching the ages of the princes. They also found evidence of facial similarity, but their methods were those of their time, limited to visual inspection and basic measurement. They could not determine the cause of death, nor could they confirm the identities with any scientific certainty. The mystery was tantalizingly close, yet still out of reach. This is precisely where 21st century forensic science can force the past to give a definitive answer. The first and most powerful step would be to subject the Westminster remains to a full modern inquest. A new exhumation, conducted with the utmost respect, would allow for a battery of tests unimaginable in 1933. High-resolution CT scanning could create a perfect 3-dimensional digital model of every bone, revealing the tiniest fractures or cut marks that might indicate cause of death. If the boys were smothered, as the traditional story goes, there may be no bone evidence. But if a more violent method was used, modern forensic pathology could identify it. The bones could also be analyzed for traces of heavy metals like arsenic or lead, which could point to a slower method of poisoning. However, the most definitive evidence would come from DNA analysis. This process would involve 2 critical steps. First, mitochondrial DNA testing. This type of DNA is passed down directly from mother to child, virtually unchanged through generations. Scientists could compare the mitochondrial DNA from the skeletal remains to that of a known, verified maternal relative of the princes. The perfect candidate already exists: the exhumed and identified remains of their sister, Elizabeth of York, who is also buried in Westminster Abbey. A match would confirm, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the bones in the urn are indeed those of her brothers. The second step would be to use the same techniques to try and extract a sample of the paternal Y chromosome DNA, which is passed down from father to son. This could then be compared to the DNA of the famously identified remains of Richard III, discovered in Leicester in 2012. A match here would be the final, irrefutable proof of identity. But what if the Westminster remains are not the princes? Or what if testing proves they died of natural causes? The investigation would then pivot to other lines of inquiry, namely a re-examination of all potential suspects through the lens of historical probability and motive. The case would remain open, a cold case file waiting for a new generation of historians and scientists to find another clue. The disappearance of the princes in the tower is more than a historical whodunit. It is a story about the nature of power, propaganda, and the fragility of truth itself. By applying the cool, impartial analysis of modern science to these 500-year-old bones, we have the opportunity to finally grant these 2 boys the justice they were denied in life, and to pass a verdict on a king who has been on trial in the court of public opinion for half a millennium. Stretching across the Breton countryside in northwestern France, the Carnac alignments present a spectacle of ordered chaos that is both mesmerizing and deeply puzzling. Imagine over 3,000 massive standing stones, arranged in seemingly endless parallel rows that march across the landscape for more than 4 kilometers. Unlike the dramatic, clustered circles of Stonehenge, the stones of Carnac are linear and expansive, a monumental grid of granite erected by a Neolithic culture over 6,000 years ago. The sheer scale of the site is overwhelming, representing one of the most dense concentrations of ancient megaliths anywhere on Earth. For centuries, the purpose of these silent sentinels has been a matter of intense debate. Were they a vast open-air temple for religious ceremonies, a giant calendar complex aligned with the sun and moon, or perhaps a boundary marker for a sacred territory, a physical representation of a community's connection to the land and the cosmos above? The most enduring and captivating theory is that the alignments functioned as a sophisticated astronomical observatory. Some researchers have noted that the major axis of the largest alignment, known as Manuscripts, points roughly to the sunrise on the summer solstice. Others have suggested that the carefully placed rows could have been used to predict lunar standstills or even track the movements of specific stars important to the early farmers who built them. The idea is compelling that these stones are a frozen code, a permanent record of how these ancient people understood the rhythms of the heavens. However, proving this has been exceptionally difficult. The alignments are not perfectly straight, they curve and break, and many stones have fallen or been moved over the millennia. Without knowing the exact original positions, any astronomical theory risks seeing patterns that may not have been intended by the builders. This is where modern technology is providing a bird's-eye view that was previously impossible. The first and most critical step has been the creation of a definitive, high-resolution map of the entire complex using drone-based photogrammetry. Multi-rotor drones equipped with high-precision cameras have flown systematic grids over the entire site, capturing hundreds of thousands of overlapping images. Specialized software then stitches these photographs together to create a stunningly detailed three-dimensional model of the landscape and every single stone upon it. This digital twin is more than a map. It is a measurable, manipulable record that captures the precise GPS location, height, and orientation of each megalith. This allows archaeologists to test astronomical alignment theories with mathematical precision, calculating sight lines and solar angles for any date in the past without being limited by the perspective from the ground. Beyond mapping what is visible, researchers are using ground-penetrating radar to discover what is not. The fields around Karnak are littered with so-called invisible menhirs, stones that were toppled in antiquity and now lie buried just beneath the turf. GPR surveys can detect these subsurface anomalies, revealing the complete original plan of the alignments. Finding a dozen missing stones at the end of a row could dramatically change our understanding of its intended direction and astronomical target. This technology is effectively completing a puzzle where half the pieces were hidden, allowing for a much more accurate reconstruction of the site's original form. With a complete map in hand, the investigation moves to advanced astronomical software. Programs like Stellarium, which can recreate the precise night sky for any location on Earth and any point in history, are now being used in conjunction with the three-dimensional drone model. Researchers can input the exact coordinates of each stone and run simulations for the period around 4000 BC. They are not just looking for obvious alignments with the solstice sun, but for more subtle correlations with the rising and setting of specific stars, the phases of the moon, and the complex 18.6-year cycle of the lunar standstill. This software can perform these calculations in minutes, a task that would have taken a human astronomer a lifetime, revealing patterns and connections that have been invisible for millennia. Yet the purpose of Karnak may be more than just celestial. Another compelling theory suggests the rows were processional pathways designed to guide people through the landscape for seasonal rituals. To test this, archaeologists are turning to soil chemistry analysis. By taking core samples from the earth between the stone rows, they can analyze the chemical composition for elevated levels of phosphates and other organic compounds. Just as at Stonehenge, anomalously high levels of these elements would indicate intense, repeated human activity, the footsteps, the waste, the organic matter from countless gatherings over centuries. This would transform the theoretical idea of a processional way into a demonstrated fact, proving that these avenues were walked by large groups of people, likely during specific times of the year. Perhaps the most holistic approach involves virtual reality. By combining the drone map, the GPR data, and the astronomical software, researchers can create an immersive virtual model of the entire Karnak complex as it looked 6,000 years ago. Wearing a VR headset, an archaeologist can literally stand within this reconstructed world during the winter solstice at dawn or under a star-filled summer night. They can experience the play of light and shadow across the stones, hear how sound echoes in the avenues, and feel the imposing scale of the megaliths. This experiential research moves beyond cold data points, allowing us to understand the emotional and psychological impact of the site. It might reveal that Karnak was never intended for a single purpose, but was a multi-functional sacred space, an astronomical calculator, a ritual pathway, and a permanent monument to a culture's worldview, all woven together into one of the most awe-inspiring landscapes of the ancient world. Emerging from the shadowy world of antiquities dealers and romantic adventure novels, the crystal skulls have captivated the public imagination for over a century. These hauntingly beautiful artifacts, often carved from a single block of clear or milky quartz, are said to be relics of ancient Mesoamerican cultures like the Aztec or Maya, sometimes attributed with mystical powers of healing and psychic energy. The most famous among them, the Mitchell-Hedges skull, was dramatically claimed to have been discovered in a lost Mayan city in Belize in the 1920s by adventurer F. Mitchell-Hedges, though records suggest he actually purchased it at a Sotheby's auction in 1943. For generations, the skull's origins were shrouded in mystery, their perfect, gleaming surfaces reflecting our own desire for a lost world of ancient wisdom and advanced technology. But are they genuine pre-Columbian masterpieces, or simply the most successful archaeological hoax of the modern era? The romantic narrative surrounding them is powerful. Proponents point to the incredible skill required to carve such a complex object from a single piece of quartz crystal, a material that ranks a 7 on the Mohs hardness scale, just behind diamond. Without metal tools, which would have been unavailable to pre-Columbian artisans, the task seems nearly impossible. This has led to outlandish theories involving lost civilizations like Atlantis or even extraterrestrial intervention. However, the true story of the skulls is not written in legend, but in the microscopic imperfections of their surface, a story that modern forensic science is uniquely equipped to read. The first and most decisive tool in this investigation is the scanning electron microscope. This powerful instrument can magnify a surface thousands of times, revealing a world of detail invisible to the naked eye. When archaeologists and geologists examined known, verified pre-Columbian crystal artifacts under the SEM, they found a distinctive pattern of microscopic scratches. These marks were consistent with abrasives available at the time, such as powdered quartz or sand, applied using a bow-driven drill or a handheld tool. The process was slow and left a characteristic haphazard cross-hatched pattern under extreme magnification. When the same analysis was applied to the Mitchell-Hedges and British Museum skulls, the story was completely different. The modern skulls showed the perfectly parallel, incredibly fine grooves of a high-speed rotary tool equipped with a diamond-tipped or carbide bit technology that did not exist until the 19th century. This microscopic fingerprint is as damning as a confession, placing the creation of these objects firmly in the industrial era, not the ancient world. Beyond the tool marks, the very material of the skulls can be sourced with scientific precision. Quartz crystal has a specific geological signature based on its place of origin. Different deposits contain unique trace elements and isotopic ratios, a kind of geochemical DNA. Using a technique called mass spectrometry, scientists can vaporize a tiny, nearly invisible sample from the skull and analyze its elemental composition. The results for the major museum skulls have been revealing. The quartz used in their construction consistently matches material from sources in Brazil and Madagascar regions that had no known trade links with Mesoamerica in pre-Columbian times. However, these same sources were major suppliers to European jewelers and ornamental carvers in the 1800s. This geological evidence builds a powerful circumstantial case, tracing the raw material not to ancient Mexican quarries, but to modern commercial trade routes. Furthermore, the artistic style of the skulls themselves provides a final, crucial clue. Physical anthropologists and art historians who specialize in Mesoamerican culture have noted that the skulls are anatomically far too perfect. They resemble a modern medical textbook illustration more than a real human skull, with a symmetry and precision that ancient artists who worked from observation of real skeletons would not have typically employed. Authentic Aztec and Maya depictions of skulls, which were common motifs in their art related to death and rebirth, are often stylized, asymmetrical, and incorporate specific cultural symbols. The famous crystal skulls lack these cultural markers entirely. They are generic, idealized representations that seem designed to appeal to a 19th century European fascination with the macabre and the exotic, rather than to reflect any authentic indigenous artistic tradition. While the evidence overwhelmingly points to a 19th century origin for the most famous skulls, the investigation is not entirely closed. The possibility remains that a small number of genuine, smaller, and less spectacular crystal crania may exist in museum collections, mislabeled or overlooked. The same battery of tests could be used to authenticate these. If a skull were found with the correct abrasive tool marks, quartz sourced from Mesoamerica, and perhaps even deposits of ancient sediment trapped in its crevices, it would be a discovery of immense importance. For now, the truth of the crystal skulls is a testament to the power of science over myth. These objects are not portals to a lost world, but rather beautiful relics of a different era, the Romantic Victorian age of exploration, when the line between archaeology and entertainment was often blurred, and a compelling story could be carved quite literally into a priceless crystal. If the previous mysteries represent the loss of a single treasure or the secret of a single life, the final entry on our list is a loss of an almost unimaginable scale, a void in human history that has haunted scholars for over a millennium, the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. This wasn't just the burning of a building, it was the incineration of a significant portion of the collective memory of the ancient world. Founded in the 3rd century BC under the Ptolemaic dynasty, the library was conceived as a repository of all known knowledge, a universal archive that aggressively collected texts from every culture across the Mediterranean and beyond. It's said to have housed over 500,000 scrolls containing the works of playwrights, the theories of scientists, the histories of fallen empires, and the philosophies of great thinkers, much of it existing nowhere else. Its repeated destruction, culminating in a final blow likely in the 3rd century AD, was a catastrophic intellectual amnesia, erasing entire schools of thought and countless voices from the historical record. For centuries, we could only mourn what was gone, imagining the lost plays of Aeschylus, the historical volumes of Berossus on Babylon, or the complete works of the great physician Herophilos. But now, a suite of digital technologies is offering a stunning new possibility, not just to imagine these lost works, but to actively, systematically reconstruct them. The first and most direct path to recovery lies in the very objects that were once considered useless scraps, palimpsests. In the medieval period, parchment was an incredibly valuable commodity. Scribes, often unaware of the content they were destroying, would take old manuscripts, scrape or wash off the ink, and write new text on top of the now clean surface. These recycled books are called palimpsests, and beneath the surface layer, the ghost of the original, older writing often remains, For generations, these faint traces were illegible, but the development of multispectral imaging has changed everything. This technique involves photographing a page under many different wavelengths of light, from ultraviolet to infrared. Different inks and different levels of parchment degradation absorb and reflect this light in unique ways. Advanced computer algorithms can then analyze these dozens or even hundreds of individual images, teasing apart the spectral signature of the top layer of text from the fainter, erased undertext. It's a form of digital archaeology, peeling back the centuries one wavelength at a time. This has already yielded breathtaking discoveries, like the recovery of previously unknown texts by Archimedes from a prayer book. The potential is staggering. Countless medieval manuscripts sitting in libraries right now could be the hidden carriers of works looted from Alexandria and later erased, waiting for the right frequency of light to make them speak again. Beyond finding entirely new texts, technology is also allowing us to reassemble works that were shattered into fragments. Oxyrhynchus in Egypt is one of archaeology's most miraculous trash heaps, an ancient city dump where centuries of papyrus documents were discarded and preserved by the dry desert sand. Excavations there have yielded over 500,000 fragments, a chaotic jigsaw puzzle of epic proportions. Sorting through them by hand to find matching pieces is a task that would take centuries. This is where artificial intelligence enters the picture. Researchers are now training machine learning algorithms to act as the ultimate paleographic detectives. These AI systems are fed thousands of images of known papyri, learning the specific handwriting styles, ink blots, and even the patterns of wormholes that characterize documents from a particular place and time. Once trained, the AI can scan through high-resolution images of the Oxyrhynchus fragments at an incredible speed, identifying potential joins based on the contour of a torn edge, the flow of a letter's curve, or the alignment of a line of text. This digital reassembly can piece together speeches, poems, and scientific treatises that were considered dust, effectively salvaging priceless paragraphs from the sands of time. Perhaps the most futuristic and ambitious endeavor is the attempt to reconstruct works that have completely vanished, using only the echoes they left behind. Think of a lost play by Sophocles. While the original text may be gone, it was likely quoted, critiqued, and referenced by dozens of later authors whose works have survived. These fragments and allusions are scattered across the surviving corpus of ancient literature like pieces of a ghostly silhouette. A new field known as digital philology is using natural language processing AI to scour this vast digital library of surviving texts to find every single reference to a lost work. The AI doesn't just find the quotes, it analyzes the context, determining if a later author is summarizing a plot, praising a style, or directly quoting a line. It can then begin to model the lost text's vocabulary, its stylistic tics, and its thematic concerns. While this would not produce a perfect word-for-word facsimile, it could generate a probabilistic reconstruction, a scholarly best guess at the structure and content of the play, complete with its most famous lines and likely plot turns. It would be a digital phantom of the original, a shadow given form by the collective memory of every ancient author who was touched by its genius. The Library of Alexandria may be forever lost to fire, but its greatest treasure, the ideas contained within its scrolls, may not be gone forever. Through the quiet, patient work of light and algorithms, we are building a new kind of library, not of papyrus and ink, but of photons and code. A library with the power to resurrect the ghosts of wisdom we thought were lost to us forever. What an incredible journey we've just taken through time, from the silent stones of ancient temples to the encrypted taunts of a 20th century killer. These 30 mysteries, each one a locked door in the mansion of history, show us just how powerful a key modern technology can be. It's not merely about having better tools, it's about a fundamental shift in our relationship with the past. We are no longer just passive observers sifting through dust and speculation. We have become active investigators armed with cosmic ray detectors that can see through stone, algorithms that can reassemble shredded papyrus, and genetic databases that can identify a person from a single drop of saliva left on a stamp a century ago. This is a new era of historical inquiry, one defined not by what we've lost, but by our incredible, growing ability to find it. Every single one of these cases, from the fate of a lost Roman legion to the final moments of a legendary aviator, demonstrates that the gaps in our knowledge are not permanent. They are merely puzzles waiting for the right piece of technology to click into place. The answers are often hiding in plain sight, encoded in the isotopes of a tooth, the chemical signature of an ink, or the magnetic anomaly in a patch of soil. We are learning to listen to the whispers of the past with ever more sensitive ears, and in doing so, we are reclaiming stories we once thought were gone forever. This isn't just about satisfying our curiosity. It's about restoring voices to the silent and honoring the complexities of our shared human journey by finally getting the story right. And just think, the technologies we have today will seem primitive to the historians of tomorrow. The AI systems that can now break centuries-old ciphers are in their infancy. The underwater drones mapping the ocean floor are the Model T Fords of marine archaeology. The genetic sequencing techniques that can extract a full profile from a degraded sample are constantly evolving. What seems like science fiction today will be standard procedure in a decade. The next great historical revelation might be waiting for a quantum computer to brute force its way through an unbreakable code, or for a new type of sensor that can detect the faint ghost of a parchment's text without even opening the book. The future of discovery is limitless, and it promises to rewrite our textbooks over and over again. Now we want to hear from you. After this tour through history's greatest unsolved cases, which one captured your imagination the most? If you had the keys to the entire technological kingdom, which mystery would you dedicate your resources to solving first? Would you send a robotic sub to the Baltic seafloor to hunt for the Amber Room? Or would you sequence the DNA from a letter to finally unmask the Zodiac Killer? Let us know your pick down in the comments. We read every single one. And if you're as fascinated by these intersections of history and technology as we are, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell for more deep dives into the past, powered by the innovations of the future. The search for answers is just getting started, and we can't wait to continue